a blast from the past.
Please listen carefully.
CoCo.
Welcome to the CoCo Crew Podcast. A delicious adventure into the world of retro computing news and information. Featuring the Tandy color computer.
Hey, you got your CoCo 3 yet?
CoCo.
All right. Welcome, CoCo Cruisers. This is CoCo Crew Podcast, episode 32. We're here with the normal crew plus Boise. Maybe we have to make Boise part of the normal crew. We keep saying that. So, Mike, Neil, Boise, hello all. How is everyone?
Doing good.
Very good.
Wonderful.
Very good.
Yeah,
it is a bit
and
cold.
snowy everywhere.
Yeah, we're covered in snow here. I don't think my kids have had a full week of school all of this January.
Well, it just gives them more CoCo time.
Well, yeah, they don't enjoy the CoCo time, except for the kind that comes that's brown and liquid in a hot mug.
Hot CoCo.
Anyway, well, let's see. Let's see. It is now January of 2018. Tandy Assembly is roughly 9 months away. So if you want to deliver a baby at Tandy Assembly, you better get started.
Start the plan.
At least everyone get as much practice in as you can. I recommend that. Of course, that means CoCo Fest is only about 3 months away. Very exciting stuff. Everyone getting ready for CoCo Fest?
Locked and loaded.
Yeah, well, as hard as we can go. Yeah, I'm just still in the same perpetual state, but I am making a little progress behind the scenes, maybe. So maybe I'll at least get a clear plate for the schedules or projects after CoCo Fest. How about you, Neil? Oh, go ahead, Boise.
I was going to say, after my initial thought that I wasn't going and was able to get out of the prior event that I had committed to, I've already got my tickets made and hotel reservations and transportation set. I don't think I've ever been this early in having that done for CoCo Fest before.
Yeah. I need to make the hotel reservations, but I need to reserve my vacation time at work, I guess. But other than that, I think I'm pretty much on schedule. Unless I decide to fly instead of drive. Well, I guess maybe I just don't know what I'm talking about. But I did send in my vendor form for the Glenside folks, so at least there's that. How about you, Neil? You getting ready for CoCo Fest?
Well, I'm getting ready, getting some projects ready, and I do have to send my vendor form in, though, so thanks for the reminder to get that done.
Yep. Anyway, it's on the way. It's coming. I was trying to not be quite as involved in the planning this year as I have been in the past couple of years because I kind of get worked up over it. But kind of got dragged back in again this year, so I'll at least be involved with the some of the scheduling and stuff. But hopefully it'll still be enjoyable. I'm sure CoCo Fest will still be enjoyable. It's my bits that'll hopefully still be enjoyable. Anyway, so everyone's got their projects underway. Anything anyone want to share? No, not really. All right, we'll keep them secret. I'm working on adapting the music in Farfall to the hardware on the Game Master cartridge. I've been building Game Master cartridges and sending them out to developers around the world. I've sent several overseas, and hoping to see some output from that. People have some cool projects, and of course, people can work on projects for the Game Master cartridge using the MAME emulator as well. So, who knows? We might have a surprise there. Anyway, what about eBay or other acquisitions? Anybody buy anything cool lately?
I actually did, and today. I almost going to say I had nothing this month, but I do.
What you got?
I got a Tandy 3200. So that's very close to a Tandy Sensation.
Oh, yeah.
It's a 486 SX33 in there. See if it's upgradable.
All right. So pretty close to the complete set then. The Tandys, maybe. Well, close enough anyway.
Maybe we can get enough power on there to emulate a CoCo on it.
Cool. I think I may have mentioned in the earlier episode that I had acquired a Matra Alice 32, which was a follow-on to the Matra Alice. The Matra Alice, of course, being the clone of the MC10. And I'm not sure, I don't think I've had a chance to mention that I had also picked up an original Matra Alice. And then more recently, I also picked up a Alice 90. So now I am master of the set of Matra Alice machines. I just need to learn how to program in French.
You going to bring any of those to CoCo Fest?
I don't know. I might. A couple of them have these pretty cool plastic cases with foam cutouts or whatever. They look like a sniper's rifle.
I guess you can't fly then.
No. I might have to bring the manuals, let Boise translate them for me.
Well, it'd be cool to see one of those.
Yeah, I'd like to see them too.
They are kind of cool. But yeah, I have one of them has the original like cardboard box too. It's pretty cool. Some neat artwork on there. And also in that, along with one of those, I picked up the joystick joystick adapter for the Alice, which the Alice had, but the MC10 didn't have. Anyway, it plugs in on the expansion port on the Alice, and it gives you two 9-pin, Atari style joysticks. The only downside is that since it takes that slot, you have to play a game in 4K. So it kind of limits its abilities there. But when kind of looking at it, see if it might be worth something to try to reproduce, possibly in conjunction with a memory upgrade in the same package, which would be kind of the perfect combination.
That'd be great.
But, no pre-announcements. Anyway, anyone else have any cool acquisitions or projects you want to talk about?
Yeah, I got this cool Game Master cart.
Cool.
That was my acquisition. And also, I should just put it out there, I ran out of the Super Pack proto boards, but I've got a new shipment in. So
awesome.
If anybody's looking for those, I'm restocked, and I'll have some at CoCo Fest, of course.
I was shilling for you today on those.
I saw that. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, that's probably enough to get us going here. So why don't we take a short break, hear from our sponsors, and then we'll be back with some announcements.
My son just made the hockey team.
My Jane just had her first recital.
That's nothing. My kid can program a computer.
Parents, invest in your child's future for just $59.95. Send your child to Radio Shack Computer Camp. Courses are just 2 hours a day for 5 days. Each child is provided with their own computer. It's a fun learning experience. Space is limited, so sign up today. Get the details at any Radio Shack Computer Center.
All right, welcome back, CoCo Cruisers. Now it's time for some announcements. You are listening to the CoCo Crew podcast. We are available through Twitter as at CoCo Crew Podcast. That's all one word, CoCocrewPodcast. We're also available on Facebook. We have a group called The Space CoCo Space Crew Space Podcast because, we like spaces. Anyway, feel free to reach out and talk to us either of those ways through social media. We'd love to hear from you. We are, of course, available on iTunes for downloading as well as Google Play. And, of course, we're available for streaming through Stitcher and through the service TuneIn, which is the service used by the Amazon Echo. We should make our regular joke here about Alexa play CoCo Crew podcast, but it plays into something later in the podcast. So, anyway, we are, of course, a member of the Throwback Network. The Throwback Network is a collection of retro-themed podcasts, many of which are technology or computing-oriented or gaming-oriented. some of which are 80s culture or other just cool old stuff. So if you're looking for another podcast for your listening pleasure, then we recommend you check out the Throwback Network. Similarly, we are listed on the Game by Game Podcast Information Hub. This is another collection of retro-themed podcasts, although these are all related to home computers and gaming. So again, if you're looking for another way to spend some time listening to podcasts and your interests run towards the technical or the game-oriented subjects, then we recommend you check out the Game by Game Podcast Information Hub. Audio for the CoCo Crew podcast is hosted by CyberEars. If you have a need to host audio programming on the internet, whether you're a church or a radio station or a business, or I have no idea why you might need there, but if you do, we recommend you check out CyberEars, where you can get your audio on your terms. Should you wish to reach the hosts or of the CoCo Crew podcast, we have some emails set up available for that. The first few will reach all of the hosts on the CoCo Crew. We have show, SHOW, at CoCoCrew.org, podcast, PODCAST, at CoCoCrew.org, and feedback, FEEDBACK, at CoCoCrew.org. If instead you wish to reach specifically one host or another, then I'm available as John, JOHN, at CoCoCrew.org. Neil is available as Neil, NEIL, at CoCoCrew.org. Mike is available as Mike, MIKE, at CoCoCrew.org. And, of course, I'm pretty sure I've set up now Boise, BOISY, at CoCoCrew.org. So if you want to send us some email, have at it. We'll be happy to get it. Those are our usual announcements. I've got a few kind of special ones in here. If you check the show notes, they are represented with links to email messages. I have a couple. The CoCo Fest 2018 call for vendors/exhibitors and attendees too. Basically asking for everyone that's planning to come to CoCo Fest to let me know so I can update the website with your information. Of course, you also need to, if you're coming as a vendor, you need to send in your forms so that the Glenside Club knows that you're coming. Let's see. Also asking for presentations. If you want to present at CoCo Fest, then please let me know so that we can get you listed or get you scheduled. Right now, there's only one open speaking slot. There's a couple of people who have expressed some interest, but nobody's quite seized the moment to to claim the spot. So we're holding it open for now. Anyway, if you want a spot, let me know. We'll see what we can do. Even if we run out, we'll maybe try to figure something out later. And, of course, we have a new one here, the call for papers for the 27th annual Last Chicago CoCo Fest. This is something a little new. Boise, this is your announcement. Why don't you explain your call for papers?
Yeah, so I had an idea about doing this some time back. The idea was that maybe we could add a bit of formality to the yearly event by having what I would call a quasi-academic aspect to it, where people could sit down, write their thoughts about new ideas, new hardware, new software, or maybe improving on existing products or processes or tools or anything, and codify that in a document. So that's kind of the idea behind the call for papers. It's to kind of bring together, I guess, a think tank of people in the community to discuss these things and formalize them in documents. And maybe if we get enough participation, we could put them inside of a journal or make them available online. So pretty excited about it.
Cool, very exciting. So, so are you hoping to solve problems, or are you hoping to put together project groups, or all, or neither, or something?
I think a little bit of both. I think that we could have some problem solving or some new way of thinking or expressing an idea or software product for the community. It would also be a good place to kind of hopefully, spring up some ideas for people to collaborate together. Everybody tends to kind of do their own thing, so maybe it would be nice to use this as a process to bring some people together.
Cool. Well, very exciting. Sounds like a lot of potential there. Hopefully we'll get some people to participate. I know we've got some pretty bright people in the community, some of which have some impressive academic backgrounds. And so it'd be nice to see what can come of this.
Yep, definitely. Thank you.
Very exciting. All right. Well, with those under our belt about CoCo Fest, why don't we move on to our announcements of upcoming events that may be of interest to our listeners. Let's see, coming up, this is still coming here, February 10th through 11th, 2018, VCF Pacific Northwest, this Vintage Computer Festival, held at the Living Computer Museum and Labs in Seattle, Washington. Again, that's February 10th and 11th. That's sounds like a cool museum. I've never been there, but by all accounts, a cool place to be. And we certainly know the VCF folks. They put on good shows. So if you're in the Pacific Northwest region of the United States and have an interest in vintage computing, I would highly recommend that you get to this show. It should be a good time. All right, on the other side of the country, closer to me, February 17th and 18th, so that's a week later, the Playthrough Gaming Convention 2018, and that is held at the Raleigh Convention Center here in, well, not here, but close by in Raleigh, North Carolina. Looks like a kind of a fun event, different kind of pictures. They show one that looks like a bunch of PCs set up like a LAN party. Some of the pictures show arcade machines or whatever. They have people in cosplay. They have people playing board games and card games and whatever. So it's definitely about the gaming, not all about technology gaming. Some of it's, low-tech cards and board games and stuff. But I don't know. I mean, it looks like a fun event. And I wish I knew somebody had been. I probably do, but haven't figured it out yet. Anyway, looks like a cool event. So that's February 17th and 18th, Raleigh, North Carolina, Playthrough Gaming Convention 2018. All right, coming up after that, the big event. This is Neil's New Year, CoCo New Year, the 27th, the 27th annual last Chicago CoCo Fest.
Woohoo!
Why do they call it the last? Because they never know if there's going to be another one. This is held at the Heron Point Convention Center in Lombard, Illinois, where you have the opportunity to touch the heron. April 21st and 22nd of 2018. Sounds like somebody touched a heron there.
That's right. I was thinking the same thing.
So it's a big event. It's their CoCo Mecca. This is this is where we all touch base and keep in contact and reset and have our new year. So definitely a cool event. Be sure to come and check it out. I know we're all planning to be there. Maybe even planning on spending an extra day or two. It's of course in the Chicago area, so there's a lot of potential attractions to visit if you're in if you want to go to the Chicago area. Including the Galloping Ghost Arcade and some good steakhouses. Can't say enough. This is the reason why this podcast exists is for CoCo Fest and to promote it. So come on out and see. We'd love to break another attendance record like we've been doing. Love to see 100 people under the roof there and
blow the doors off the place.
Yeah, blow the doors off. So come on out. Let us know you're coming, but come on out.
There's 3 elevators, no waiting.
There are 3 elevators. There might be some waiting, but it won't be that bad. All right. Now, in a brilliant move of hitting the exact same date for a similar event somewhere else in the country, the Vintage Computer Festival Southeast folks have scheduled their event this year for April 21st and 22nd, 2018, and the same exact weekend as CoCo Fest.
That's very disappointing.
Yeah, we go to that.
It's been an event we've tended to go to, or at least try to attend. Events in Roswell, Georgia, which is in the greater Atlanta area. Pretty good event. It has some good speakers, good turnout, some decent flea market style opportunities, or nothing else, good opportunities to pick up weird t-shirts for people to ask you about. Anyway, sorry that they've chosen a date that overlaps to CoCo Fest, so I'm not going to be able to make that. But if for some reason you can't make it to Chicago, but you can make it to Atlanta, well, at least you got something you can do on that weekend. So, VCF Southeast, April 21st, 22nd, 2018. The following weekend, April 28th, 2018, the The fourth, Encontro Club Color Rio. Just found out about this week. This is again our Brazilian friends. They're having their equivalent to CoCo Fest, April 28th, in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. So looks like a cool event. I'm sure it'll be fun. If you're hanging out in Rio and you're bored, you might want to try to find the place and hang out, because I hear there's not a lot to do in Rio. But anyway, you may check the place out. It should be fun, and so we certainly wish our Brazilian friends some fun there at their Club Color Rio event. All right. May the 18th, May 18th to 20th, 2018. This is VCF East in New Jersey. This is Wall, New Jersey. These are the Vintage Computing folks, and it's a pretty good event. Traditionally, it's been about a month earlier, so has some conflict, either not usually directly with CoCo Fest, but sometimes the week before or the week after, making it a little tough to get to, or at least tough to go to both. This year, it'd be a little easier to go to both since it's being held a month later. Looks like they're sticking to this formula they've been holding, where they have Friday classes. Looks like maybe they have a keynote address on Friday, so that's a little bit different. And then Saturday, keynotes and exhibit halls, and Sunday, keynote and exhibit hall, and their museums open on Saturday and Sunday. Pretty good event. Have we all been to this one?
Yes.
Yeah. So pretty good event. I think we all have enjoyed that.
Comfy couch.
So
we got to see the Enigma.
Oh, that's right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very good show. Very good show.
Very good. If you're in the New Jersey or northeastern part of the United States in late May and looking for a vintage computing event, well, this is probably your best ticket.
Are any of you guys going to that one this year?
It's on my maybe list.
Yeah, I've rated a maybe. I don't know. I've kind of have not enjoyed travel as much lately, so we'll just see how I'm feeling about travel. All right, one more event on the calendar here. This is July 16th to the 22nd, 2018. This, of course, is Kansas Fest 2018. This is the Apple II event held at Rockhurst University in Kansas City, Missouri. You stay in the dorms with your fellow retro enthusiasts and spend all your days talking and playing with Apple II stuff. It's a cool event. I wish it was CoCo and not Apple, but other than that, a pretty fun event, and the technical content is actually surprisingly good. I would rate it highly recommended. So there you go. There's our schedule of events as of January 2018. There's plenty of stuff to do, at least through the first half of the year. All right, well, that covers our announcements, and so I guess we're going to have to take another little break, and then we'll be back with some news.
If you sell color computers on eBay, you know that competition is fierce. So how can you differentiate your eBay listing and get top dollar for your items? It's easy with the New York Times Asset Tag System. These self-adhesive aluminum asset tags affix easily to any vintage computer item and instantly add value and provenance. Each attractive asset tag features the New York Times Eagle logo and a blank equipment number box. The CoCo 2 usually sells for $70 on eBay, but with the addition of the New York Times asset tag, the exact same CoCo 2 becomes a rare item and lists for $150. An original color computer analog joystick usually sells for $20 on eBay, but with the addition of the New York Times asset tag, the price instantly jumps to $80. Do you have mysterious, undocumented, or non-working cartridges just collecting dust? Turn those items into cash by attaching the New York Times asset tags.
I put an NYT tag on an old CoCo 2 and listed it on eBay with an undocumented mysterious pack. Together, they're listed for $299.
The New York Times asset tag system includes 15 self-adhesive blank asset tags, and our 10-page booklet with tips for maximizing your eBay profits. Start making more money today. Here's how to get yours.
Maximize your eBay sales with a New York Times asset system. Just $29.95. Call in the next 10 minutes and receive a second New York Times asset system for just an additional $10. Call 100-0100. That number again is 100-0100. Operators are standing by.
All right. Well, now we're back with some news. Let's see. We have maybe a little bit longer than usual news segment this time. We'll see. Some of them are similar, so maybe it'll collapse down a little bit. I don't know. Why don't we just get started? So the first one on the docket here, it's a YouTube video from Rogelio Perea. Rogelio Perea, I think that's right. At least it's close enough this way I've heard it pronounced.
I'll let you take the bullet on those.
Yeah, I'll take that one. Rogelio, I know you know how to find me. Tell me if I'm saying it wrong. So subject of his video, Tandy 200, that's a terminal for OS 9 level 2. So pretty cool, nice little combo of retro computing equipment to doing a task. That's one of the beauties of OS 9 is that it is multitasking and multi-user, so you can have logins from different terminals and that sort of thing. And so here he's using a Tandy 200 for just that. Nice little proof of capability or whatever. Very cool. Any of you guys ever run terminal stuff for your OS 9?
Yeah.
Yep.
I used to run Dynacalc on a VT 220.
Nerd.
In college, when I was younger, I had my CoCo 3 with one of those 4-port RS-232 packs. They call them the COM4s.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And I was running I think 2 WISE terminals and a modem.
Fun stuff.
Screaming. Oh yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a cool video.
Very nice. All right, moving on. We have an article in Forbes from someone named Seth Porges. I have no idea. It's Porges. Seth Porges. Anyway, title of the article, How the Original Prince of Persia Changed Video Game Animation. Now, Prince of Persia never appeared on the color computer, which is a shame for us, actually, because it's a pretty damn cool game. It was first released on the Apple II. I first played it on a PC compatible in college, probably 92 or so. I remember being amazed at how fluid and awesome the graphics, the animation were. So this is the story of how those were created. And just to shorten it up, basically the game's creator, Jordan Mechner, he basically did what you would call rotoscoping, where he filmed his little brother with a VHS tape, and had his little brother kind of do some of these stunts. And then he went back and had some kind of mechanism for transferring that captured video into digital data for animation. And that's how he did the animation on the first the Apple II and then other machines. Well, he did. I think he only did the Apple II, but sort of carried over to some of the other machines. Anyway, it's a cool story. So there's a little technique. If you really want to do something similar with the really cool animation on your CoCo, then you could do some rotoscoping or whatever. If this isn't technically rotoscoping, it's something close to it. You could do that. Also, in more recent years, Jordan Mechner apparently dug out the original source code for Prince of Persia and has published it online. He also has published a journal that he kept when he was writing the game. And so you could, using with a source code, possibly with the journal for reference, you could take that code and port it over from the 6502 origins over to the 6809 and have a pretty cool game for the CoCo.
Yeah, that would be great.
Are you baiting Glenn Hewlett?
I would love to see Glenn or someone else take that on.
Yeah, I would too. It'd be a pretty cool one.
So that would be really cool. Awesome game.
I've always thought the CoCo 3 could definitely handle that.
Oh, there's no doubt about it. I mean,
Yeah, if an Apple II could do it. Yeah.
Exactly.
So, I mean, you'd be slightly handicapped because there's bound to be some Apple II-isms in the code or whatever, but I'm sure you'd overcome that. Anyway, well, there's your challenge, gauntlet thrown down.
You know who might be up for that challenge is Mark McDougall.
He'd probably do really well with it.
Yes, he would.
I don't know where when last we left our hero, Mark, he was doing 6809 code based on the Star Wars Arcade game, doing some kind of development platform for writing code for the arcade hardware. So that's a neat project.
It is.
Yeah.
But I don't know about you guys, but I haven't been haven't been able to pull out my Star Wars arcade game for experimenting with that
one. Yeah.
Cool that you have one.
Yeah, well, yeah. So anyway, moving on, I guess we'll go on to the next couple of news items. Actually come from Mr. Boise. Got the browser loading a web page served for my CoCo 3, running the improved HTTP daemon in 6809 assembly and the DriveWire Mac server. And then the next line is, for those of you who run Macs, DriveWire server for Mac OS is available for download. So Boise, tell us about these two.
Sure. So DriveWire, as we all know, DriveWire 4 is the standard that Aaron and I came up with. Aaron wrote a DriveWire Java server, but it's been problematic, at least on certain platforms, to get running. So I resurrected the original DriveWire Mac server written in Objective-C for Mac users and started working on it in earnest a few months ago and got it to the point now where it's running pretty well. It does the networking. It's starting to do the virtual terminals and everything else. The HTTPD daemon was part of the work that Aaron had did whenever he did DriveWire 4 and added the networking extensions. However, he wrote an HTTP daemon in Basic 09, which ran okay, but in a constrained memory environment like OS 9, where you might want to do a lot with less. I thought I could maybe improve on that by rewriting an HTTPD daemon in 6809 assembly. So that's exactly what I did, and it runs pretty well. It serves up web pages. It serves up images. Parses the HTTP headers, and works pretty well. And it's a little slow on DriveWire. Really haven't run it on anything faster, but the hope is that once we start getting newer hardware that, SD cards, things like that, and getting OS 9 drivers for those, which I'm sure exist, we could run it on there pretty fast and load things up. So it works pretty well.
Cool.
Yeah, I've definitely used it. It's fantastic. I've missed it because of the Java issues that the Mac had. So it's nice to have a nice stable platform, and I got to play with the HTTP, and also the really nice feature you added is Apple script support for DriveWire. So you can just write a script to say, load these 3 disks up.
Yeah, that does sound very nice. That's one thing. Java is supposed to be, write once, run everywhere, or whatever. However true that may or may not be, but I've always thought that you do kind of lose something or potentially gain something by going to the host platform and taking advantage of capabilities that has. The hosts aren't quite as differentiated these days as it seems like they used to be, but back in the days when the Amiga had Rex ports and stuff like that, where you could control stuff using the Rex language on board and do stuff like that, or in this case, you've got your Apple script or whatever it's called. Pretty cool stuff. I'm sure you could do some interesting stuff on a Linux machine using some of the dbus messages in the background to control things. Anyway, pretty cool idea. It might inspire me. I've been wanting to learn Rust or maybe some other modern language, and maybe so a worthy project for something like that. We'll see. No pre-announcements.
I'll just add about the DriveWire servers that there are other options out there for multi-platform. I saw someone had written a Python server. I don't recall at the moment. So there are other alternatives out there that are more multi-platform, although not, taking advantage of the GUI features of one particular platform.
Yeah. Well, there's like a plain C one, I think, that might as well be multi-platform.
Yeah, in fact, that's the one that I just put up on GitHub along with the DriveWire Mac server. So I have GitHub repositories for the DriveWire Mac server and the Linux or Unix/Linux. It's based on, I think, on TermCap. Or Curses, actually, the Curses library.
Yeah, cool. All right, well, good. So on the Java stuff there, did it always have some problems, or is this a matter of bit rot that Java just hasn't stayed enough the same or whatever?
Mike, I think that's the case, right? Mike, I know that I had some issues as I upgraded.
It worked great when it first came out. It worked great when it first came out, but as it's just bit rot, like you said, over time. But Java, updates every other day, it seems. And it just got to the point where some things broke and it just behaved erratically or wouldn't run at all sometimes.
There could probably be a whole podcast on the politics of Java and the development of the language and the ecosystem there or whatever. In fact, I'd be surprised if there's not, but this isn't it. So, so we'll move on from here. The link is from Jim Gary, but he's referring to some work by a fellow named Robert Sieg. I guess that's how you pronounce it. So I know Robert actually seems to be, he's really more of a VZ200 person. For those not familiar, the VZ200 was an Australian machine, had a Z80 processor, but a 6847 video chip. And so there's some certain similarities with the graphics or whatever. And so it draws some people there's a certain amount of transfer between the MC10 and the VZ200. And so you see that in those communities a little bit. And this Robert Sieg is one of those people. But he comes over to the MC10 world. Now, in the MC10, one of his problems is that when they wired it up, they basically didn't wire up the highest address line. I guess it is the highest one or the next one down. One or the other. There's an address line from the 6847 that's not wired up. And so it can't do the most high resolution graphics modes, at least not effectively. You can turn them on in the chip, but you get kind of a mess. And so if you look at the picture here, Jim is showing it. So there's this project that he calls his Fullscreen project. And basically it's a way of turning on these video modes and still trying to make them useful, even though there's kind of a mess at the top and the bottom. And so you can see where Jim has his, he's got two versions of the screenshot, one with a virtual cutout that you would be like an overlay that just blocks out the top and bottom of the screen. It's kind of funny, really. But anyway, so I just, this is an excuse to talk about this full screen stuff. So these guys are working on the MC10 world, trying to get the most out of their machine. And like I said, the 6847 doesn't really know how much memory is attached to it. And you just put it in its mode and it works its address lines. And, the fact that there's nothing out there on the other end doesn't matter to it. So it just takes whatever shows up on the bus and shoots it out as video. You can do some neat hacks and get something out of it. And, you may need this little cardboard cutout to make it look a little better, but it's something that can be done. It's a little bit weird. Anyway, since Jim posted that, I thought I'd include it here since it's kind of an interesting hack there. There's a lot of work there that Robert Sieg and some others have put into that full screen project over the years. So you may want to check out the MC10 Yahoo group and see some of that. So back to something a little more normal for us. Is the next one is a Jim Gary video for a game that he's got running, I think, on the MC10 here. They ported the MC10 and SG6 graphics from The Amazing Maze 4, published in March 1983 of Softline. So he's called it Amaze. So it's a maze generation game, I guess, or no, it looks like maze navigation here. So it looks like a 3D style of environment. It's kind of neat. So kind of like Dungeons of Daggerath or something. But so very cool. So once again, Jim Gary laying down the marker for how lazy the rest of us are. Here's his first one. So moving on, here's another video or link to a video. So Steve Strawbridge posted a link. Something they did over with the CoCo Talk folks. They did a live stream trying to produce a winner for the Forest of Doom Chalice of Bravery, which I guess was the second prize for the Forest of Doom. So they did a live stream and had a lot of fussing and cussing for about 4 hours as people played the game simultaneously. Ultimately, Jason Rygaard came up with it. So anyway, kind of a fun video if you're into watching people play games. And if you're hot to know the latest news on Forest of Doom or whatever, you may want to check it out. What do you think, Neil? You've been keeping up with Forest of Doom?
I've been checking the videos out. I got to get back playing it again. It's a fun game.
Yeah?
Yeah.
They're pretty cool. All right, moving on. The next link from someone named Richard Harding. Says, a little present for the community, part 1, CPU, restored Dragon 64 circuit diagram taken from an A1 full-size white print. So I guess it's a schematic for the Dragon set up for some sort of European paper size or something. Anyway, that's fair since the Dragon's got some European roots there.
Yeah.
Anyway, if you're a Dragon owner looking for a high-res scan of the circuit diagram, then this may be for you. So check it out. All right, the next one, why is this here? Z80 Emu Evolution. It's got nothing to do with the CoCo, right? Well, yeah, nothing to do with the CoCo per se. But if you're interested in reading, I think a lot of people kind of get snippy and uppity and mad about how this emulator or that one has some weird problem, or it was working, but now it doesn't work because it changed something, or blah, 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 whatever. I think a lot of people don't have a full appreciation for the intricacies and the complexity of what it's like to build an emulator for retro hardware or any hardware, really. And so, why don't you take a read here, see if it helps you understand why sometimes things don't work quite like they're supposed to, especially when you're trying to do something that no one else has tried to do. Any of you guys have a chance to read this one?
I've read it a little bit, yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's, things like, do you count by instruction or do you count by CPU cycle? Has a lot of follow-on design features that flow from some of these decisions and things you have to account for. Anyway, I thought it was interesting. Hopefully someone else does too. All right. So the next one, again, not really CoCo per se, solid-state tape device for the micro-chem. So the Chem one was a single-board computer made basically as a demo of the 6502 processor before it became, popular in all the home computer machines or whatever. Later, it had a lot of application as basically an embedded system in a way similar to how people nowadays might use a Raspberry Pi or an Arduino. Nowadays, there's a modern replica of it called the Microchem. Point of the article is they're building a storage device for this system. Anyway, my point being, it's kind of a cool technical write-up. Somebody solving a problem on a real machine that's kind of going to have some same kind of same era of electronics that the CoCo is using. And so thought there might be some interesting information here for folks. Again, I thought it was interesting. Hope someone else did too.
Yeah, I definitely did. I think, emulating the tape digitally is it's a good read just because of the, the techniques and stuff involved in grabbing that data from the Microchem. So good read.
Very cool.
great moments in history.
Mr. Watson, come here. I want to see you.
Mr. Bell, it worked. I heard every word.
Duh, you were supposed to. I called you in here because I just received the newest Radio Shack flyer in today's mail.
Look for your Radio Shack flyer in this week's mail. Save 25 to 50% on select items throughout the store.
Mr. Bell, where are you going?
Why, to Radio Shack, of course, for big savings.
What about the telephone?
If anyone calls, take a message.
Radio Shack, America's technology store.
Just keeps on ticking, and April is much closer than it seems. My brain just keeps on drifting back to Lombard, even in my dreams. There's a man in the back selling neuron packs, and his solder's as hot as the sun. Hardware to sell and stories to tell, and everyone's having great fun. Oh, yeah, so many options at the great big auctions. A memory worth sharing when you touch the heron. Yeah, 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 yeah. So we set up the tables, connected all the cables, and it turned into a CoCo Fest. Made our reservations, watched the presentations, and it turned into a CoCo Fest. CoCo Fest.
For a sweet time, come to CoCo Fest April 21st and 22nd at the Hebron Point Convention Center in Lombard, Illinois. Make your reservation today. Call 630-629-1500 and ask for the special CoCo Fest room rate. CoCo Fest. Make it your own.
All right. Neural network on a Commodore 64. This article, the article's 30 years old. September 4th, 1987. I think I've got to this link, through another link somewhere else or whatever. So anyway, I just discovered this in the last couple of weeks or last month or whatever. But it seems like, artificial intelligence and neural networks and that sort of thing is a popular subject these days, a topic du jour, state of the art of computer science or whatever. So I thought it was interesting to see this article and point out that at least part of this technology is quite old, and here's being implemented on a Commodore 64. If the Commodore 64 can do it, the CoCo can do it. So if you have an interest in this kind of thing and you want to get on a kind of a more gritty level, actually learn the bits and bytes of it, maybe this is something that would have some experimentation that might be fun for you. So I don't know. Check it out. What do you think, Boise?
Yeah, so I saw this, John. Obviously, I have an interest in this work. I've worked in this type of field, and I was struck by the fact that it was from 1987. Obviously, things that the techniques for neural networks were known then, but the computing power was not readily available as it is today. I think it would be fun to get someone to take that basic program, basically make it run on a CoCo. It looks like what they're doing is they're teaching teaching a neural network to recognize dot matrix numbers, which is a pretty easy task, and one of the more simpler things that you do whenever you take a neural network course is you look at the MNIST data set, which is handwriting recognition, and teaching a neural network how to recognize handwriting of different characters. So this is really really cool stuff. I wish I'd had the time to do it myself to play with this program, but I unfortunately have too much going on.
You'd have to write your CoCo programs and then get to 1,000 emulators all hooked up and to be able to run anything useful.
And then I could warm my house.
Exactly.
Well, that code is not very huge, so
no, it's not.
It's definitely got some possibilities.
I'm looking at it right now, and usually Commodore 64 Basic was poke after poke after poke. I see a little bit of that in here, but most of this looks like standard basics.
So cool. So there you go.
It might not be too hard to translate that then.
Yep. Just need somebody who's interested and talented, and where's Ben Anding when we need it? All right. Well, let's moving on. The next link is something I thought was interesting. It's called the Ocelot Arcade system. I was hoping when I dug into this is somewhere there'd be a if you would like to order one, that kind of link.
Yeah.
I don't think it actually included that. And this is not a particularly retro processor here. It's the Microchip DS-PIC33. It's kind of a more modern microcontroller. It's not as much power as like a Raspberry Pi or something, but it's not a slouch either. Kind of neat. Somebody's built a system that does vector graphics or uses vector graphics. So, and again, for those unfamiliar, the typical television uses what's called a raster, which is it's almost like a lawn running a push mower over your yard. You kind of go one line at a time and back and forth across the screen. Whereas vector graphics is more like an Etch-a-Sketch, where you kind of put a beam at a point on the screen and you turn it on and move it around and it draws on the screen that way. And so the oldest classic arcade games, like Asteroids and Tempest and Star Wars, like I mentioned, use the vector style of graphics technology. And some people think it's pretty cool, including me.
Yeah, I'm one of them too.
Me too. It's amazing.
And one is a little hard to get a true Vectrix, that's different, but vector style display these days, except many oscilloscopes have what's called an XY mode, and you can do vector style graphics on the oscilloscope, and that's exactly what they're doing here. And so, if nothing else, it's kind of a cool demonstration of what projects you might do. You could probably implement something not too different from this with a CoCo as the processing core, and I would personally love to see that. So anyway, I wish I could tell you where to buy it, but if you can figure out where to buy it, maybe you can give me one.
Yeah, put us on the list.
Yeah. All right. Well, so moving on. It's something I've kind of been hearing about it for a while and then never quite come across an actual link. But this is this one project or three projects in one? I'm not sure. I'm not sure if they're supposed to target different systems or why they have different names here. But something called Arduino or Kazduino or TZXduino. Basically, they're Arduino-based little machines that are designed to replace a cassette player. And I'm pretty sure at least one of the possible targets is a CoCo or the Dragon. Looks like you can target the Amstrad CPC. There's some others in there, I think, as well. A lot of people complain about tapes. They're not the best, certainly not the most convenient storage format these days. I happen to think they're kind of fun. But sometimes it's useful, if nothing else, to use the tape interface, but maybe have a different device feeding it, and that's what this is for. So you may want to check it out, see what's available. There is a little store here. I remember seeing a store. Anyway, it's for someone named Duncan Edwards. I think he's over in the UK. I think he's more of a Dragon guy, but I don't know. You may want to check it out.
It's a perfect time for this device to come out with all the new cell phones dropping the headphone port.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, very true.
That's true. So who else are they dropping from Sony or anybody or Samsung or anybody like that, or is it still just Apple? Or
I think the new Pixel. I think they dropped.
Pixel 2 dropped them, so I think everyone's going to follow suit. I think that's the trend.
Huh. All right. Well, I was going to get a Pixel 2. Maybe not now. Oh well. Anyway, cool. So the next one on the list here is a link on the Facebook group from John Strong. It's got a prototype design for the CoCo 3 FPGA. So as you may know, John Strong has kind of become the 3D case printer for the group. For everyone's project in the CoCo world, they seem to go to John Strong and get him to design and print 3D printed plastic cases for them. In this case, we've got the DE1 FPGA development board combined with the an analog board for CoCo 3 FPGA to kind of give it CoCo style I/O ports. And you marry them together, and then this is a plastic case to wrap it all up. Kind of makes it look a bit more like an integrated computer or something.
Yeah.
So anyway,
Yeah.
what do you think?
It gives it that computer look. It actually has I think it looks pretty good.
Yeah, it needs a case. It's kind of an ugly beast.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. So pretty cool. So moving on, we got let's see, we got two more from Jim Geary. Let's see, we got something called The War animation. We got an animation of a tank shooting at a helicopter. Kind of cool.
Yeah.
It's not an actual game, I guess. It's just an animation. That's kind of cool.
Yeah, it's a fun video to watch, though. Little ASCII art animation.
Yeah, pretty cool. And then he's also got a video of a game called Meteor Storm, which is derived from a ZX81 game. It's for the MC10. Lots of shooting and stuff, space shooter kind of thing. Pretty cool. So again, Jim Geary, cranking them out for your enjoyment. Moving on, space adventure game for the Tandy Color Computer 3 by Brian Joyce. So he's got I think this is a development blog for a game in progress called Emissary, aka yet another space game. So he says it's a space adventure game for the Tandy Color Computer 3 currently in development. A multi-level basic game involving a lone space traveler touring through the universe, encountering strange phenomenon and other civilizations. So that's so he's got this blog set up at ft501.com. Let's see, he seems to be working through some graphics on graph paper. If you like to read development blogs, it looks like this will be right up your alley.
Yeah, good to see someone writing code for the CoCo.
Definitely. Cool. And that's a cool web domain he's got, ft501.com.
No, very cool. Oh, I even made the inspiration list here. Now at 47 years old, having support from the color computer community and getting huge inspiration from people like John Strong, John Linville, Nick Morentis, Rick Adams, D. Bruce Moore, Paul Thayer, Steve Bamford, and Steve Strobridge, I thought it was time to do it. Woohoo! I always love to be inspiring to people.
Yeah, you got to mention.
Yeah, very exciting. All right, next one. Oh, this is a little melancholy, I think. And so the massive unloading of my video game and computer collection begins, and it's from Bill LaJudas.
Yeah.
So, boys, are you in contact with Bill? Do you know much about this? What he's doing here?
We talked a little bit, but I haven't talked to him lately, and looks like he got rid of, I'd say, a good bit. I don't know if it's most of his collection, but he had a pretty sizable collection from what I recall. So, and based on the pictures on Facebook, it looked like there were several moving vans that came to, I guess, take it away for auction.
A lot of stuff. He does say, says the vast majority is going to auction. A lot of stuff there.
Yeah, that's a collection.
The full photo gallery link, 182 images.
Jeez.
Wow.
Were there any CoCos in there? I didn't really peruse them.
I haven't really dug into it. It's hard to imagine there's not, considering what other things are in there, unless he purposely kept them out. He's definitely got a lot of stuff in there.
I think he was going to keep a CoCo 3, he said.
Yeah.
Yeah. But, yeah, he had a lot of stuff for sure. So, I don't know. This is, you may want to check into that, keep up with the auction, particularly if you're in the New Jersey area.
He may be crashing the vintage computing market.
He may be. He may be big enough to do it.
Yeah.
The size of that trailer was huge.
So
and I'm sure it's all primo stuff too.
I'm sure it's all pretty good stuff. Yeah. All right. Well, Bill, hopefully you're just secretly resetting and just be competing for other stuff now. That'd be cool. All right, moving on. Steve Strobridge, Cosmic Aliens. So I know from other sources that this was a game he developed on a PC in BASIC, and QBasic, I guess it was. And he was poking around and recently and found it somewhere on the internet. It kind of revitalized his interest, and now he's kind of re-implementing it on the CoCo. Very cool. Another kind of development blog here. If you're interested in development blogs, it's like I said, it's another good one to read. Looks like kind of a Space Invaders, Galaxian kind of a game. Pretty cool.
Yeah.
All right. Next link's from Giovanni Nunez. I guess that's how it's pronounced. It says, I've written a tool to help programming in BASIC. You write your program in any text editor without line numbering and using definitions and comments like a modern programming language, and my tool will convert it into a classical line numbered BASIC program. Yeah, so I think there's some other tools that are out there. I think Stephen H. Fisher, I guess, has had one forever called Urbane. I think there's one in the Apple II world that's kind of a similar thing. But so for those that don't quite get it, imagine if you could take a program written, say, like for BASIC 09, which is kind of freeform, almost looks more like Pascal or something, and then squish it through a tool and then be able to run it on the bare CoCo BASIC, which expects line numbers and stuff. It is a lot nicer way to program in ways that I could not even fathom to understand back in those days until you've kind of programmed without line numbers. That line numbers don't seem so difficult, but once you get rid of them, you don't want them back.
It's funny coming from a non-programmer. I would think you would want the line numbers. It keeps it organized.
Yeah. I mean, you can sort of see it, and basically line numbers are just labels for every line. So in a sense, it's not that different, but it is. So anyway. Moving on, I threw in a ringer here. Another, not exactly a CoCo link here, but it's a Gama Sutra link. Making a Game Boy game in 2017, a Sheep It Up Post-Mortem, part 1 of 2. I guess maybe there's a part 2 out there by now. So basically, somebody's made a game for the Game Boy, and let's kind of talk about the development process or whatever. I include stuff like this because, it's not necessarily all that different just because it's a different system. You're going to use kind of similar tools or similar techniques for programming on a CoCo or whatever. And not exactly the same, but some of it, there's going to be some overlap. So I thought this might be interesting for some budding programmers out there. And just because you want to program for the CoCo, you might want to program for the Game Boy too. So
yeah, it's a neat little game. It's something certainly you could port to the CoCo.
Well, there you go, too. You could port the game itself or something. You could be inspired by it. So pretty cool. It almost looks like a reverse Farfall, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It kind of is.
You got to climb up.
Oh, shit. Now, man, I've got myself a new project. So anyway, food for thought. All right, another one. The next one link is another from Jim Geary. Ranger update, now with restart. So I think this is one that he's had in progress for a while, and this is an update on his game. So it's a Star Trek type of game, I guess. Star Ranger. Destroy all Klingons. You have 4 bases. All right, well, very cool. Jim kind of puts out these games, and he does revisit them and updates them, keeps them up to date. Very cool. Again, something to do on your MC10.
Or your Alice.
Well, there you go. Maybe that's should dig out the Alice. I have to play in French.
Give some of these a try. Create the French versions, yes.
All right, so we have a couple of blog posts here from Glenn Hewlett, both related. So Glenn is, so this is the person that did the, he did originally a Space Invaders kind of transcode from the Z80 code, and then he did Pac-Man. Now he's looking at doing Defender, which is in some ways a similar project and in some ways different, because Defender uses a 6809 processor. So you're not having to translate the assembly code. Well, I mean, not all of it. But you have to account for the fact that the video mapping is done differently. Some of the hardware differences, you're going to put things in different places. You have to account for the controls differently, that sort of stuff. So it's somewhere between a port and a bootleg of Defender. But so he's got a couple of blog posts here on it. One talks more about the Defender. The other one talks about some code from Defender, but it kind of goes into a coding trick that they use for loading. This is someone from loading from the controls. Anyway, some of it's about Defender per se. Some of it's a little bit more about analyzing the code and learning tricks. Kind of cool to read. If you're interested, I'd recommend taking a look. Did you check it out there, Boise?
Yeah, I've been following Glenn's work since he did the Pac-Man port, and I love it. I think it is just really cool. It's taking those old video games that we played, as in our teen years, and making them available on the CoCo. And I still say it's amazing that this could have been done back when the CoCo 3 was being sold in 86 and 87, had we had that right set of bits in the right order on a floppy disk, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Very cool.
Obviously the work to make those bits in that arrangement is very, very hard, but now with the cross development tools, it's very possible and easy to do. I say easier, not that it's easy, but it's just terrific work. Very good work.
Yep. Very cool.
That could have been running in a Radio Shack on display.
Yeah.
That's right, Neil. Maybe they would have sold more CoCos. Who knows?
They might have.
Yeah, probably would have.
Well, that's the cool thing. I mean, Glenn, he's doing some challenging projects. They're technically challenging. And he's got a pretty good hand with the writing. So it's not too dry. It's not too boring or whatever. It's not too, he has a good style. Let's just put it that way. It's easy to read and informative and entertaining. So very good. All right, moving on to the next link. By the way, Glenn has, I think, a part 3 out there now. He might have a part 4 by the time you hear this. So be sure to check out all his blog.
The Dragon is back with 64K. Hey la, Dragon's back. Serial port in the case is great. Hey la, Dragon's back. ROMs were 2 kinds of basic. New ways for you to be creative. Fully compatible with the Dragon 32.
Dragon Data Limited is proud to present the new Dragon 64. It has twice the memory of the Dragon 32, featuring a real serial communications port.
Get your Dragon 64 today. Hey la, Dragon's back.
Dragon Data Limited.
It's starting to rain. I'm going to roll the windows up on the car.
Okay, sweetheart.
You've worked hard for your color computer. It took years to assemble all of the pieces. You're thinking about the next step for your system, and you're happy that the rain gives you a chance to spend time with your computer.
Oh my God! What?
Life is unpredictable. That's why CoCo Mutual wants you to think about term system insurance. Taking care of future expenses if anything should happen to your vintage computer system. It's easy. We get to know your lifestyle and your needs. Then we give you our best quote and our competitors. You could receive up to $2,000 of coverage for just $15 a month. We offer plans with no medical exam required. Call CoCo Mutual at 888-6809 or visit cocomutual.com for your free quote. It's not just your computer, it's your life.
Moving on, we got a link from William Schaub. Picture of him dressed, riding a horse. Kind of looks like he's dressed as a Civil War soldier of some sort. Anyway, it says, I've committed my Hello World code that reads its own source code from disk using ROM calls. I'm relying on a T1 VDG for lowercase display and had to write some conversion routines to translate between ASCII and VDG codes. He's got his project out here to help, he's learning some assembly code and wants to make stuff available for other people to be able to learn too. If you remember, that was something we covered in an earlier episode. And so I guess this is maybe his latest version of that. And so he's got code that opens a file and displays it and does some of the conversions that you need to convert ASCII values over to screen code values for the VDG. So, it's a real piece of code that's doing real work and dealing with real problems. Now, do you often need to have a program read its own source code? Well, no, not specifically, but many programs will need to read files off a disk and that sort of thing. So, pretty cool. What do you guys think?
Yeah, it's definitely good. I think it's good to see a lot of these, even like what Glenn was doing. It's good to see like example code to understand the process. So it's good stuff.
Yeah, it's good for people to share and show what they've learned and that sort of thing. So very cool. All right. The next link, this is announcing the Asteroids game for the MC10 comes from Darren Atkinson. Let's see, he says, it's an email address to Jim Gary. It says, hey, Jim Gary, a while back you suggested an Asteroids clone for the MC10. I went ahead and adapted a version that was originally written for the CoCo, in parentheses, Star Blaster by Jim Kearney. It requires a 16K RAM expansion to run on real hardware. Uses a lower resolution RG2 graphics mode, and that's partly because what we were talking about earlier, where there's not quite enough memory on the MC10 to actually use the higher resolution modes. Mm-hmm. But anyway, so you released the code. So it's a competent Asteroids game running on the MC10. Pretty cool.
It's very cool.
So, and Darren's done a couple of these where he's basically taken a binary. It's almost like the projects that Glenn Gila's doing, in that he takes a binary written for one machine and translates it for another. But in this case, he takes a binary for the CoCo and translates it to run on the MC10, which is a different processor. So there is some actual work there. The processor on the MC10 is not totally dissimilar from the 6809, but it's not exactly the same either. So
yeah,
some interesting work there. And I think this is at least his third or fourth program he's done like that. So pretty cool.
Very cool. It almost makes you want to get an MC10.
I've got a couple, even some friends.
I was just thinking, I got to hook up my MC10. I mean, this is, I keep saying this every podcast.
The MC10 takes a bad rap on some corners of the CoCo broadcasting world, but I happen to think they're kind of fun. There are definitely some dumb decisions made in the design, or at least I can't explain them. If they're not dumb, I can't explain them. But they're still a competent machine in many ways, and you can do some cool stuff with it. All right, so moving on, we have a link to a video. The video, I think, actually is taken by Steve Strobridge. I think they filmed it actually at Tandy Assembly, but the person in the video is Richard Lorbieski of Boysen Technology, and the video shows him desoldering and removing a 6809 chip from a CoCo 3 as part of the process of upgrading it to a Hitachi 60. So he's removing the 6809 and replacing it with a 6309. And so it's an interesting video. So Richard's using a desoldering tool with a built-in vacuum pump, which is by far the best way to do this if you have such a tool. And so he's able to take away the solder and get the chips out with essentially no damage to the board. So on the other hand, recently I saw pictures of someone else's attempt to do something similar on a CoCo 3, and they basically ruined the CoCo 3 by tearing up the traces off the board, and it was heartbreaking, really. But I guess the point here is it's become very popular for some people to do the 6309 upgrade, not only just on the CoCo 3, which I think is pretty reasonable, but they're also doing them on the CoCo 1s and 2s, which I think is kind of silly because there's not really any software that takes advantage of it. But anyway, if you're going to do it, make sure you have the skills and the tools, and if you don't, seek out somebody like Richard that does, because once you tear up those CoCo motherboards, they're not making any new ones. you know,
I gotta keep them in good shape.
And while there's plenty of them out there for now, it's not unlimited, and I don't want to get to the point where we have to rely on, whatever FPGA or whatever is available today. I'd like to use the old machines as long as possible.
Absolutely.
So, anyway, yeah. Well, I'm stuck in my ways sometimes. But anyway, do like I said, if you're going to do this upgrade, do try to make sure you can pull it off competently, or find someone who can. Well, so the next link here on the agenda is a topic I love from a presenter that I'm pretty fond of too. So, Mike, why don't you tell us about it?
Yeah, I did a video demonstration of the Game Master Cart, as well as a technical walkthrough of the color computer sound multiplexer. If you're interested in the Game Master Cart, I'll be doing a series of these, so I'm already working on my follow-up, which will actually be walking through making sounds. I've made a point of doing this through BASIC with the thought that all the principles are the same when you move to machine language, and ultimately I'll move to machine language. So hope to keep that series going. It's a cool card. It's fun playing with that sound chip, and I plan to also cover the ROM banking features of it.
Cool.
Yeah,
cool.
Mike, I watched that video, and it was you just did a great job, man. Very easily explained, using animations to highlight things about the source code, the registers, how to change things so that the sound is enabled. It was just very well done.
No, thanks. I'm just trying to demystify it, make it understandable to people, and it's gotten good responses so far. So
yeah, it's very good.
I do have one suggestion. When you get into the video where you're going to be talking about how to make sound, could you do a demo song that starts like this?
I'll see what I can do.
That'd be cool. Oh Lord, yeah, very good. It's like almost like watching a Mr. Wizard episode. I really enjoyed that.
That was a great video.
So very good. All right, so moving on, we have another Jim Geary presentation here. Underground Adventure, and in parentheses, Duckworth. Not sure what that is. It says a text adventure by Peter Gerard, found in the book series Exploring Adventures, ported to TRS-80 MC-10 from Dragon 32. It says evocative of Colossal Cave Adventure. So anyway, I don't know why the Duckworth is in there, but anyway, it's an adventure game for your MC-10. What else is there to say? It could be pretty fun. If you enjoy that kind of game, you should check it out. Yeah, then score another one for Jim Geary. Very cool. All right, so the next one is another video. This one's from the 8-Bit Guy. This is a personality on YouTube that does a lot of kind of retro computing style of videos. And this time he's doing something on the Color Maximite basic computer and microcontroller. Is this, again, not really CoCo, but there is a connection. A more modern machine based on, I guess, a PIC-32 processor. There's a basic language implementation running on it. With the language itself is pretty similar to the old Microsoft style basics of, similar to like Color Basic or AppleSoft or something like that. So it's a kind of a familiar programming environment for a lot of us. The processor's fast enough that what was sometimes a bit slow back in the day on this processor runs pretty quick. If you're the kind of person that might listen to a podcast like this, it's foreseeable that you might be interested in a computing platform like what's being described, the Maximite. The tie-in here is early in the days of the Maximite, which came out of Australia. Apparently, Nick Morentis got pretty heavily involved in it, and he did a port of Donut Dilemma to the Maximite. Since I actually have one of these Maximite boards that I got through a Kickstarter, it's actually, I think, the exact same board that's is in the video here, but with a different case wrapped around it. I've played the Maximite version of Donut Dilemma. It enthralled me and my kids for a couple of weeks until my daughter set a high score so high it basically ashamed the rest of us from even bothering to play.
Destroyed, devastated.
Yeah. The Maximite forums kind of have a they kind of worked out a sort of a semi-standard for how you would hook up a joystick to the Maximite, which was kind of an exercise left to the owner to build. And so I did build the joystick adapter for that, and probably ultimately led to the joystick adapter for the CoCo. But not only did I build it, I also extended it so that you could use the Genesis joypad with it. In Nick's original port of Donut Dilemma, you would just use a standard Atari-style joystick with one button. And there's actually two actions in Donut Dilemma. There's a jump and then there's a throw. And so you'd use the button to jump, and then you'd actually have to push up on the joystick and the button to throw, which I thought was kind of awkward. So I hacked into the source and changed it so that you could use one of the buttons to throw and another button to jump. And then I since I had the other buttons, and then I made one button a pause and then made the start button work to start the game. And I thought it was pretty cool.
Yeah.
Actually sent the changes to Nick.
Oh yeah.
I don't think he ever released them, but I did send them. If you do get a Maximite and you want to play Donut Dilemma and you want to build an adapter and use Genesis controller with the buttons like I described, contact me and I'll see if I can dig out my changes for you.
That's cool.
Yeah,
and that's
really
a good version of that game as well.
It is. It's pretty fun.
Yeah, I think
Jim O'Keefe had it running at CoCo
Yeah, Jim
Fest.
O'Keefe. Yeah, he has one of those, and he had it running at CoCo Fest, and that was fun to watch.
Yeah, it was good. We just had the keyboard support, mind you, but we didn't have that adapter. But
yeah, I should at least bring my joystick adapter and make sure him has my version.
Yeah, we could try it out.
Yeah. All right. Well, so just a side note, I've always thought that something like that Maximite, if we could all get together on it, the whole community or whatever, that something like that would be a better CoCo 4 than whatever we strap together with a 6809 on it and 6 levels of rickety infrastructure to give us enough memory to play with.
I'm so with you there.
I just think it'd be better.
Single board.
Yeah, I think that would be a lot better and would satisfy a lot of I want to program the old school way, but I want to do new stuff with it. It's just, how do you herd the cats to all pick the same board?
This is sounding dangerously close to a CoCo 4 discussion.
Yeah, no, it's as close as I wanted to get. So, so we're going to move on. All right, one more Jim Geary post. This one's kind of neat. So Jim Geary port of Forest of Doom, which he's taken from the D. Bruce Moore game, and I think he's working with Bruce on it, actually, porting it over to the MC10. So MC10 users should end up with the ability to play Forest of Doom. So I think that's pretty cool. So there's yet another reason for you to get your MC10, Neil.
Yeah, I got to get this hooked up.
Keep your MC10 on your desk and play
That's
that.
right.
It's small, so it's really easy to set a book or something on it and nobody will notice.
Small footprint.
All right. The next one. This is, again, Mr. Boise working with Pierre on CMOC to solidify OS 9 support and bring the standard C library over. You want to tell us about that, Boise?
Yeah, so that's obviously CMOC is Pierre Sarrazan's project for compiling C programs to run on the CoCo and the Disk Basic. So I reached out to Pierre probably, 2-3 weeks ago and see where he was on OS 9 support, which he had actually already gotten something working, but there was a significant lack of support for certain things in the standard C library. So I worked with him a little bit. We got some memory issues taken care of in the operating system, figured out some things, and I've been taking the Crider C libraries, which we don't have source for, at least commented source, but we have disassembly for, and repackaging it up so that it could be compiled with CMOC and assembled with LW tools to create a library of the standard functions that are needed to do basic support for apps. So the reason this is pretty exciting is because we have a lot of C source code out there on various websites for OS 9 programs for the CoCo that has just been languishing out there. And before now, compiling it meant you had to compile it with the microware C compiler that ran on the CoCo itself, which was pretty slow and was also limiting in that it didn't understand ANSI C code, and just kind of made it difficult to bring some of this new source code that's out there and port it back to OS 9. So this is pretty exciting because the CMOC compiler does process ANSI C source code, and with the library changes that we're making, I think we're going to have a very powerful platform to compile C programs, not just for Disk Basic, but for OS 9.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Cool.
Awesome work.
Very exciting. Yeah, so we expect a bunch of code to follow then.
I think that by the CoCo Fest we're going to have all the kinks worked out, and hopefully one thing that I need, and of course I'm going to make a call out right now, is I could use some help because there's a lot of work in commenting header files and making sure everything looks fit and finish. There's a lot of stuff in the library, so I know a lot of people in the CoCo community tend to kind of go off and do hardware projects, and there's plenty of people doing that, but it doesn't seem like there's a lot of people doing this kind of work.
Cool. Yeah, because apparently there's only so many kinds of hardware projects that people do anymore.
Yeah,
so rather than stomping on each other, maybe we should find some software to do as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's some duplicity in the hardware side of things, but no one is really doing anything with the C compiler for OS 9, so by all means, come and help.
Cool. All right. So, very exciting. Moving on to our last news item. Neil, are you awake?
I am. I'm here.
Okay, last news item. Introducing and available now, CoCo Sega Genesis Joypad / Joystick Adapter CR, cost reduced version. Tell us about that, Neil.
Yeah, I wanted to do another run of these Joypad adapters. For people that didn't get them the first time around, thought maybe $40 was too much, so I figured I'd make a cheaper version. Kind of what got me onto this was back at Tandy Assembly. Jim Brain came up to me and put 2 pre-made DIN cables on the desk in front of me, and that kind of got me thinking. I'm like, well, this will save a lot of time. So basically, fast forward, I bought a whole pile of DIN connectors or DIN cables from Jim, and I'm doing another run of these. I'm going to sell them for $25. Basically, the difference is that you get no case, and there's no serial cable on these for the extra 3rd and 4th button on the Genesis Joypad. But you can add it later. Like all the hardware is still on the board, so it's definitely fully upgradable. And I'll still make the full version if anybody wants the full one. I mean, I'll still do that. I do have cases, and we can put the serial cable on it as well, so that's not a problem.
Cool. Well, very exciting. If only some enterprising person would actually take advantage of the extra buttons, then maybe you'd need that extra cable. I think that will come. We'll just have to see how long it takes. Maybe we can write some games in C that use the extra buttons.
That'd be great.
And, run under OS 9 and use the sound cartridge for the Game Master cartridge. Just put it all together. What do you think?
That's sounding good.
Now is the best time to own a CoCo.
Yeah, well, that probably is true. All right. Well, that is the end of our news segment. So why don't we take another break, and we'll come back with some listener feedback.
Come to the Radio Shack hideout. I'm Mr. Small, and I'm tired of big computers. Give me something that's really, really small.
MC10 is small. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's not big. No, no, no. MC10's got just 4 gigabytes. Tiny metal keys in a case that's white.
Radio Shack's MC10 combined with any color television gives you a big system in a tiny package.
4K bytes, they feel right. Tiny metal keys in a case that's white.
The Himalayas, Nepal.
You have traveled far seeking answers.
Yes, I seek the ultimate happiness.
You may see the Master now.
Your Eminence, I've walked for 10 days for an audience with you.
Dude, come on in here.
Am I in the right place?
Totally.
You hold the secret of true happiness?
Yeah, check it out. It's Screen Machine.
The ultimate graphics text screen enhancer, Screen Machine, is a machine language extension to BASIC that enables you to easily mix high-res graphics and text in your programs. A user-definable 224-character set featuring true lowercase and graphic characters like cars, planes, tanks, and more. Support mixed text modes from 8x16 to 64x24 with full print at, tab, and comma fields. Full support of underline, subscript, superscript, reverse video, top and bottom scroll protection, double width, and full color characters. Screen Machine can be used in games, word processors, utilities. The possibilities are limitless.
You're right. This is true happiness.
Gnarly.
I better go now. I have a 10-day walk back ahead of me.
Dude, that's totally military. I took the helicopter.
Screen Machine from Sugar Software.
Okay, what a break. That was cool. Feeling much better. Now it's time for some feedback. All right. Our first item of feedback today, we kind of hinted at a little earlier. This feedback comes from Steve Batson. He says he's listening to the CoCo Crew podcast, and they were talking about saying, Alexa, play the CoCo Crew podcast. And my Echo Dot woke up and tried to find it. So that actually works, which is kind of funny because we've been doing that as a joke for a while, and it's just kind of funny to think that works.
You forgot the LMAO.
Oh, yeah.
LMAO.
Laughing his posterior off. All right. Well, thanks, Steve, very much. It's cool to know that actually kind of works. Let's see. The next one comes from L. Curtis Boyle. He says, thanks so much for inviting me to the roundtable discussion that became part of episode 31. We loved having you, Curtis. In fact, so much we might even have you on again this very episode. And then finally, we have one from Tony Capolini. And Tony says, this is probably primarily from Mike. He says, I love the All in the Family spoof. Great job on Archie and Edith's voices. Although I'm not sure Mike did both of those voices.
Yeah, Joe Rowe did the other voice. Yeah, Joe Rowe was Edith. But thank you for the feedback. Thanks for the compliments.
Oh, very good. Very good. Awesome. All right. Well, that is our feedback. It's a little short this month, so I'll just go ahead and say we're always happy to have your feedback, positive or negative. So you can send it in email or comments on Facebook or Twitter, or you could record something and send it in. We might even put it on the air. So either way, we'd love to hear from you. Neil keeps score and makes his day when he gets mentioned in feedback. You should see him light up. Well, why don't we take another little break, and then we'll be back with a little discussion among the hosts.
Your Tandy color computer is powerful, but it's plagued with one problem: clunky expansion. Bowtech Instruments has the solution: quality hardwood cabinets for your color computer. Eliminate that mess on your desk by transferring your computer components into a single elegant case. Our beautiful wood cases have room for your color computer motherboard, disk controller, 2 half-height floppy disk drives, and an additional 5x7 board, such as an 80-column card. Each case is precision milled in our factory and includes a high-quality switching power supply for all of your color computer components. Each case includes a matching hardwood keyboard enclosure for your color computer keyboard. Stop fighting the mess of cables and adapters that take up all of your desk space. Make your system shine with a new hardwood case from Bowtech Instruments. Cases are available in your choice of hardwoods: oak, maple, cherry, walnut, and teak. Another quality computer product from Bowtech Instruments, Utica, Michigan, USA.
All right, CoCo Cruisers, welcome back to, I think, maybe our favorite part of the show. This is where the hosts pick a perhaps controversial topic and toss it around, beat it to death, maybe state a few unpopular opinions, see what we can come up with. So the topic came up this week on the Facebook group, specifically about cross-posting, and this is where you want to advertise something like maybe it's an episode of your favorite podcast, or maybe it's a new blog post, or maybe it's just a picture of you dressed up like I don't know, maybe like a monk going to the CoCo Fest or something. and dressed up like CoCo Cat. And you post it to your favorite CoCo group. But nowadays there's several other kind of CoCo related groups. Possibly too many. Maybe we could add that in as part of the discussion here. But so the complaint was, instead of just posting it to the most specific CoCo group, that people are posting them to all the CoCo groups, and even some of them kind of crossing to off topic, like posting your high score in a disc extended color basic game on the CoCo Nitrous 9 group where nobody cares. And so, since we got into the off-topic part there, I thought we could expand that. There's been a lot of off-topic stuff on the CoCo mailing list. One particular person seems to think it's funny or something to start off with, I know this is off-topic, but, and then goes on to post something really off-topic. So here's, I'm just laying out the discussion here. How big a deal is it when you post stuff that's off-topic for the venue, whether it's a mailing list or a specific group, either in on Facebook or a group, or maybe a forum, topics area in a forum, or a chat forum or whatever? How big a deal is it to go off topic? And then, assuming you're basically on topic, how big a deal is it when you cross post and take the same information and put it in a dozen different places, which can be irritating as well. There, I laid it out. Who has an opinion?
Everybody does.
I do, but yeah, go ahead, Mike. What do you think? I'd like to hear yours.
Well, I'll handle the cross-posting first. Yeah, I don't know what a person is doing. I guess it comes down to how frequently do you do it. If you're putting out something every day to 6 different groups, I'm sure people can get bugged by that. But I also don't think it's wrong to cross-post because you're trying to reach as many people as you can. And, of course, we know Facebook has no filtering tools to speak of, so you have to learn to. We all scroll by a dozen things that we've seen a bunch of times, or ads, or things we're not interested in. So I don't know what the big deal it is. I think, free speech has to reign here, and, I'm not saying that people should abuse it, but I don't think it's a big deal that people cross-post things to similar communities.
Right. Well, I mean, people should be respectful, right? You shouldn't do things that are clearly out of line, whatever that might be. So it depends on what you're posting.
Yeah.
But I mean, if you're posting something about a general CoCo kind of thing, there's a pretty good chance that the people that are dragging people might be interested too, right? Because they're similar machines with similar basics and whatever else. So I don't think that's unreasonable to post to both CoCo and the Dragon, and then the Brazilian guys have their group as well, so you could include that one. But then, there's other groups that, if you're not interested, why'd you join the group, right? But you probably can't take it too far, like the example of discussing, basic programs on the OS9 group or whatever. You just have to ask people to have some sense about that, I guess. What do you think, Boise?
I think that, it comes with the territory, right? The CoCo community has, I would say, explosive growth recently, and a lot of enthusiasm, and you don't want to do anything to mute that enthusiasm or to dampen it. And it just comes down to just good management. I don't blame people like Stevie Strobridge for posting on every group that there's about to be a CoCo Talk Live coming on. I think that's great, spreading the word out, getting as much as possible. We kind of have to, it's kind of a good problem to have, right? Unlike the off-topic posting, which is really probably the worst thing you could do, in my opinion. That doesn't really take a lot of brains to get right.
Yeah,
we saw a perfect example of that just a few days ago on the Facebook CoCo page when someone had posted a semi-relevant, I'd say pretty relevant, post about a video game designer who happened to be of a minority race, and then someone really got in there and just tried to spoil the cabbage, so to speak, with some really, incendiary comments. Right. So, that's an example of posting something that is fairly on topic or fairly relevant and just going hog wild. So I think people have to be responsible and considerate of each other and give everybody a little leeway, especially whenever it's material that is relevant. Now, if you're just outlandishly posting stuff that makes no sense, you really should excuse yourself and not do that. That's my opinion.
I think along with that is if you're the reader, you need to, also not react violently and explosively to something you might disagree with. Just,
right.
You're free to say nothing.
Right. Well, that's something
that's right.
A lot of people don't seem to be able to do these days, is just be quiet. But yeah, I mean, like for the cross posting, okay, sometimes you'll see the same thing 4 or 5 times. There's been once or twice I've said, like, ooh, Stevie, couldn't you slow down a little bit? But I mean, like I said, it's no worse. I have a cousin that posts just ridiculous, dumb political stuff all the time, and then she'll throw down at the end of it. And if you don't agree, just go ahead and unfriend me. And it's like, oh my God, like I'm not human if I disagree. Anyway. So we see stuff like that all the time, and we kind of just ignore it or scroll past it, or maybe you don't totally ignore it, but you don't make a big stink about it, right? And so I think if you've expressed an interest in CoCo stuff by joining the groups, okay, sometimes you get a little extra, but I think that's a good problem to have.
Yeah.
There's nothing worse than being part of a dead community. There's plenty of dead machines out there that you could post, and some of them were always kind of dead, like the Mattel Aquarius, for example. There's just nothing out there, right? But and probably for good reason. But I don't know. But like I said, now, like Boise was saying, the off-topic stuff, to me, that's almost like an assault. It's like you're stealing my time. I go to, especially for a mailing list or something where I have to dig a little deeper to get there, and then you posted stuff that is just totally off topic about or tenuously on topic, like, oh, well, I can run an emulator on a PC, so therefore I'm going to discuss how to install OSs for PCs so that I can run an emulator on them. Well, that's pretty much a pretty long stretch there, and I think you're kind of a jerk when you make that argument, honestly. So, anyway, so I've said that. Neil, I don't think we've heard from you. What do you got to say?
I agree with what Mike was saying. Basically, if the information goes to all the groups, like if it's relevant, then I think that's fine. I mean, a case like Stevie's show or even our podcast, you might want to advertise that to even non-CoCo groups, because people listen to different podcasts. It doesn't have to be their own machine. But yeah, off topic. That's definitely you don't want to do that. That's
cool.
Yeah, I think another way that things get off topic is that people pirate subjects. It started off as a discussion of something legitimate, and then it started talking. Then people start having a thread of 50 messages talking about their kids or something. And that's,
I had one of those, or we used to race those down on the salt flats back in '57. Or whatever.
While I was repairing TV transmitters.
Exactly. We see that a lot on the mailing list, but I see that on Facebook too. That, like you say, that stuff just kind of flows off into nowhere, and
the title doesn't correspond with the information.
So I think it's good etiquette to kind of ask yourself. Is that happening? Is my response going to actually be kind of in line with the topic of this thread? And if not, there's nothing that says you can't make a response, but why don't you make a different response with your own topic or something like that? And if it is totally off topic for the group, then maybe you shouldn't make the response at all.
Yeah. I guess the other thing is, seeing people negotiate prices for things, those are things that should be really taken, privately offline, off of the CoCo list. I don't really think, there's a line you're crossing there, and we're just not interested. We're not interested in your 10 messages about the price you're negotiating.
Right. Or what time you're going to meet down at the Sonic on such and such avenue.
Right.
You have to remember the golden rule, right? Do unto others as you would have others do unto you. I think sometimes, though, some people don't even care if that is done to them, so maybe that doesn't apply. So
right. Well, there's I forget the name of there's an axiom or whatever about networking is be liberal with what you accept and judicious or conservative or whatever the term is with what you admit. And so basically, okay, people are going to say some stuff once in a while that you think is off topic or inappropriate or whatever, but you can let it go. Just try not to be the one doing it. And I think if everybody would follow that rule, we'd all be a lot better off. So there, man law. So, anything to add? Any other take on this? All right, beaten to death. All right, well, that should hold us then. We're gonna take another break and get on with the rest of the show. So please stay tuned.
Why buy just a video game from Atari or Intellivision? Invest in the TRS-80 color computer from Radio Shack. Unlike games, it has a real computer keyboard. With the TRS-80 color computer, the whole family can learn computing at home. Plays great games, too. Under $300, the TRS-80 color computer. Only from Radio Shack, a Tandy company.
Is this you?
Oh my God, I've got 40 pages to print!
Tired of waiting on a slow serial attached printer? End the waiting with Blue Streak Ultima, the ultimate serial to parallel adapter.
Wow, I'll have this report ready in time for the meeting.
Just connect Blue Streak Ultima to your CoCo's built-in serial port and connect the other end to any printer with a 36-pin Centronics-compatible parallel printer port. Blue Streak Ultima works with any version CoCo. 7 switchable baud rates, 300 to 19.2. Select the desired baud rate with the easy-to-use selector knob. No jumpers, no hassle, just faster printing. Try it on your system for 30 days, risk-free. If you're not totally satisfied with the performance of Blue Streak Ultima, return it for a full refund. Blue Streak Ultima comes with a 1-year warranty and costs just $39.95. Blue Streak Ultima, the ultimate serial-to-parallel converter.
All right. Welcome back, CoCo Cruisers, to an interview segment. This time for our interviewee, we have asked Mr. L. Curtis Boyle join us.
Hello, everyone.
Mr. Boyle, of course, is a longtime CoCo notable, and also one of the major co-hosts of the other CoCo podcast, CoCo Talk.
Podcast we shall not name.
Anyway, so we've had a few others of him. Well, he's actually already been on the show as part of a roundtable, but we've had some others of his crew over for individual attention, and we thought it was time to get Curtis on as well. So, welcome, Curtis. How are you doing?
Not too bad. I'm glad you saved the worst for last.
Well, I'm sure we could probably pull a few more. Who knows?
Yeah, it won't be the last, yeah.
But, well, let's see. So Curtis, I don't know where to start here. So you've been around a long time. Are you a CoCo kid? Did you have a CoCo as a young person?
Yes, I did. I got a CoCo 1 4K in September, I think it was, of 1981, right after grade 8 graduation. We had a Commodore PET at the school when I was in grade 7, which got me interested in computers. And then the following year, they got an Apple II Plus, so that was like, oh, wow, color. And then I said, well, I'd like to get this. I was staying after school. I was going in early. You know, we were, myself and Dwayne Downing, another former CoCo user, we got so interested in computers that we'd go to the school at about 6:30 in the morning and wait for the janitor to unlock the doors so we could get onto it. Which,
Wow.
He didn't like that much because we also stayed late afterwards too, and he'd be telling us, I want to go home and eat, just go home already. So we got hooked on it. And then the Apple II Plus, I really wanted to get one of those until I found the price. And the parents would not spend that much money on it, so I settled for a CoCo. But then I also discovered the CoCo had stuff like a sound command, which the Apple II did not. You had to use peaks and stuff to rattle the speaker. So I just kind of fell in love with it after that and slowly upgraded, 16K, then I had extended basic, and then I went to 64K. And then when the CoCo 3 came out, I got that and just kept on going.
Cool. Very exciting. So were you an early adopter when Tandy started to bring OS 9 out for the CoCo?
I briefly flirted with level 1 when it came out, probably about 84, 85, but I didn't really start getting into it until the CoCo 3. And then I bought it and didn't really know what to do with it. And then at the time, I was working at Mackenzie Ray Tickets, and they had a PDP-11 that was running all their industrial-sized line printers to print tickets. And one of the circuit boards blew. And PDPs by 1988, 89 were already quite rare to get parts for, especially in Saskatoon. So we were basically, stuck with nothing to be able to print, and we had to make major league sports teams ready to go. And then I remembered that I had a Disto Supercontroller 2 with the 3-in-1 board, which had a parallel port, plus I had a serial to parallel interface for the bitbanger. Mm-hmm. And I said, you know what, I've got a computer at home that I can drive 2 printers at once. Maybe I should bring it in. And they said, anything we can do, because it's going to take us 2 weeks to get a replacement board. So I brought it in and fired up Basic 09 for the first time and kind of went through the manual, figuring out I already know how to do extended basic, so it wasn't too much of a jump. And within about 2 days, we had the jobs back up and running again in the CoCo. And then after that, and I think we repaired the PDP once. And then we discovered the CoCo was easier to program for. It was just as quick. We actually hooked up terminals and stuff to it too. And then we eventually just retired the PDP because it was more cost on a PDP to replace one board than to buy an entire hard drive system and 8 terminals for our CoCo. So we ended up with a monster system, which we had made a video for Lonnie Falk and Rainbow at one point, but unfortunately got lost over the years. But at the end of it, we had 120 meg of hard drive storage on 2 hard drives. We had 8 serial terminals running at 4800 baud and a 1 meg 609 base CoCo 3 that ran the printers, including laser printers later on, for probably about 10 years.
Wow.
That's fantastic.
Amazing.
That's pretty cool. Now, as you mentioned, that's Saskatoon. I guess that's Saskatchewan. Is that right?
Yep.
And that's where you call home still to this day?
Yep. Yep. And
Wow.
Bill Noble, one of the other guys that did Nitrous 9, the very first version there, he's from here too. He also worked at the same ticketing companies and did the CoCo programming there for that stuff too. And he's no longer in Saskatoon. He's in a little smaller town about an hour east of here called Humboldt. But
at some point in all that, you and Bill got curious or dissatisfied with the stock OS9 or what, where you started to tear it apart and then reassemble it to become Nitrous 9?
Not really like that. I mean, we were downloading patches like when Kevin Darling released, some of the patches for graph-driven stuff, the Christmas patches it's called. I mean, we were getting some speed ups with OS9 as it was, and we got no hard drive controllers, no floppy controllers, and that helped speed things up too. And we got 6552 based serial cards, which ran better than 6551s, like the RS-232 pack from Radio Shack. So we got the Eliminator and a few other things. We were running some pretty decent hardware, pretty decent clip. And then when the 6309 kind of got leaked on CompuServe and stuff from that Japanese publication, and Kevin Darling did a quick test just to see if this was all true, and he did a little sample program hand-assembled just to test the TFM command, and it worked. He was quite surprised. And then Chris Burke came out with Power Boost, and we'd been reading all the specs of it and learning how to fiddle with it ourselves there. And then we were reading about this native mode thing, and it says you'll get about a 10 to 15% speed increase pretty well on everything instantly without having to recode nothing. And we went, geez, that would be nice.
Yeah.
So the impetus for doing what turned out to be Nitrous 9 was actually just to get native mode working, because Chris did the original version of Power Boost just in emulation mode. So we used TFM and some of the other special instructions, some extra registers, but he couldn't do anything too extensive because hardware interrupts and stuff are different between the two for what registers they push and pull if you're on native versus emulation mode. And to be honest, and I'll reveal this here, I mean, when Bill and Wes Gale first talked about it, because they went to a show, I think it was a Pacific Northwest Fest, up near Seattle or somewhere in there, somewhere in Washington.
Mm-hmm.
And they'd seen Power Boost, and they were talking between themselves that we should do a native mode version of Power Boost, basically. And when Bill came back and was saying, I was going, like, I'd never tried disassembling an operating system before. Like, I just thought this was rocket science.
Well, everybody does that.
Yeah. So, I mean, Bill was saying, we're going to disassemble OS9 and redo it so it runs in native mode with the native mode stack. And I went, yeah, sure you are. And I just kind of poo-pooed the whole thing, and I watched him struggle, and he'd try to change OS9P1 or the REL and boot, and it would crash and crash and crash. And I was just kind of snickering in the background. When he first got it to actually boot up the full kernel, and then it loaded the entire OS9 boot file and then crashed, I kind of went, oh, you guys actually are making it now. I mean, now it's starting to work. So that's when I finally joined in. But I wasn't the easily convinced one out of the batch. It was the other two.
That's cool. Yeah, I imagine that's the kind of project that you almost have to be completely done before it even looks like it's going to work at all.
Yeah.
Yeah. So a lot of work there, no doubt.
Yeah, well, watching OS9 boot come up, and then when we finally got up to the point where CC3 Go and the shell first came, and then that crashed because we had missed a couple of things. But that took about a month or two at least just to get to that point. But that was a revelation moment that we actually got it up to the point where you could read stuff on the screen besides OS9 boot and failed.
Yeah. No, yeah, I definitely I can imagine the feeling there. It sounds quite a bit like my early experiences bringing up Linux on a machine, and I had the source code for that.
Yeah, I wish we'd had access to the stuff. Like Kevin and them had been working on that level 2 upgrade project. Of course, none of us knew that. And they had the whole thing disassembled, and I think they even had the source for Microware at that point. And we just had to do everything clean room because we didn't have any of that stuff, and we were just learning how the OS worked. And thank God for Kevin's Inside OS9 Level 2 book and the OS9 technical reference part of the manual. Actually, are both combined is actually a pretty darn good resource.
Yeah.
And it was enough for us to figure out how everything worked.
Cool. Now, so originally Nitrous 9 was distributed as a patch set. Is that right?
Yes, because of legal issues.
Sure. And how long did it persist like that before you
before we guessed that we had changed enough of it to be legally different?
Right.
I think it was around 1.16. I think we started distributing it without being a massive bunch of patches.
Cool.
So it was a fair bit because we went from 1.0 with 01 all the way up to 1.16 before we tried doing that.
Very exciting.
Quite a few versions.
Yeah.
Well, if I could just hit one more area as an opening survey, and then maybe we'll turn it over for some other people. So those in the CoCo community that are OS 9 ambiguous or oblivious or whatever the term is there might still be familiar with you because you have a pretty well-known website that covers CoCo games.
Yes, and I really have to get back to it, but I keep getting distracted with Nitrous 9 stuff.
And so I'm looking through you. It looks like your earliest changelog entry is from December of the year 2000. So, 17 years ago now?
Yeah, I was running it on our local free serve, which was a links-based hosted thing on some Unix system command line all here. And I was actually creating the web pages at that point on the CoCo and then uploading them to them and then hosting the site from there.
Wow, that's cool. In the process of that, I noticed that you, of course, have a contact with a lot of the original authors, and many of which have given you permission to distribute their games.
Mm-hmm.
So how did you accomplish that much contact? Did people see what you were doing and reach out to you, or did you?
Very rarely. Most of the time it was me trying to hunt them down.
Yeah.
Because most people, if they're game programmers at that proficiency level back in the day, most of them stayed in the computer industry. So they definitely have a presence on the web, whether it's their resume or whether they're working for a different company or they're on Facebook or MySpace or whatever it was at the time. So I usually I would blindly find, this guy has the right name. He's roughly the right age if it kind of, explained, he was at the right age to be a programmer in his late teens, early 20s, which most of them were in the early 80s.
Sure.
In the micro markets. So I would just fire off emails. And I got some false positives. I'd found Douglas Morgan that I was hoping was the Dungeons of Daggorath Douglas Morgan. It turned out to be a completely different guy who had a very interesting history in computers with IBM on his own, but nothing to do with what I was looking for. He's now a painter in BC.
That's pretty funny. Yeah, there's some guy out there, his last name Linville. I think he might even be John Linville, that is out there as like a VC or something out in Silicon Valley. I've never actually bumped into the guy, but once in a while there's been a little bit of confusion.
Yeah. I haven't seen a second Boise Peach yet, though. That's a really unique name. So
that is a unique name. Yeah. Well, okay. Well, like I hinted at, I've kind of run us through kind of a survey and probably missed quite a bit, but put a few dots on the board. Maybe some of my co-hosts here would like to help fill in. Who has a question for Curtis?
This is Mike. I've got I guess my first question is, where did you get your first CoCo?
Radio Shack.
There in Saskatoon?
Yeah. Yeah, we had a bunch of Radio Shacks here, and we had one or two managers that actually were fairly computer literate. And, I mean, Dwayne and I used to hang out at the Radio Shack stores after we got booted out of the school. We'd go there in the evenings. It was within walking distance, and we would just sit there. I think we used the Model 3 a little bit before the CoCo first came out. But the CoCo, I mean, had color and sound. It was quite interesting. And they would let us just sit there and program because it actually attracted customers. Oh, what are these little kids doing, type thing.
Right.
And they let us go through the basic manuals, which was really cool because when we got our first computers in 81, we had a bit of a head start then on the CoCo itself. And neither one of us could afford program packs because the Canadian dollar at the time was so low, I think the average cart was like $40. And, as being grade 8, grade 9, there's no way we could afford stuff like that very often. So we had to program all of our own stuff in BASIC.
And then, you had this massive system running the printers for a while. What did you graduate to when you finally let go of the CoCos there?
We eventually graduated to Windows. I think we waited till Windows XP.
Wow.
Because Windows 95 and 98 weren't completely preemptive multitasking yet.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, if we had to, copy or format a floppy to copy something from one of the salesmen, it would just freeze the printer dead until the format was done. Because Windows 95 still halted the operating system until the format was finished. So, so we're running these printers that are supposed to be running at 300 to 600 lines per minute, like full lines, 132 columns, and it would just freeze dead for like a minute and a half, which wasn't very impressive. So we just put it back on the CoCo because we can copy stuff. We had utilities for copying PC-DOS stuff on there too, and it didn't even hesitate. So Yeah, I think Windows XP was the first Windows we actually jumped to afterwards.
So it's a long time ago now, but that's still a pretty good service length up until then.
Yeah.
Very impressive. Well, Boise, you've been quiet.
Yeah, I wanted other people to get a chance.
Neil, did you have any questions on the game type stuff? Because that's more up your alley.
Yeah, actually, I just want to say, I really enjoy your website. That's actually how I first found out about you when I got back into the CoCo scene in 2005. The first thing you do is you start Googling and looking for, links and CoCo information, and your website came up right away.
Okay.
And I spent hours on that webpage. I mean, just reading, even all the interviews. I like how you post that. The emails that you've had, correspondence, back and forth.
Yeah, and to be honest, I mean, my home-based business, which is still in the ticketing industry, has been growing the last few years. My time has been getting less and less for that, and plus I've kind of gotten back into the Nitrous 9 thing and programming the CoCo somewhat.
Right.
So I've been leaving less time for the games thing, but I really got to take a weekend or something and just kind of get back in, because there's so many new games and stuff out, and there's literally, I think last count, about 600 I haven't put on there yet.
Wow.
So I mean, there's lots of work to do, and it takes a fair bit of research, because I don't just throw in a screenshot and here's the game.
That.
I try to do a bit of research, like when did it get released, who were the original authors.
Yeah,
it's very informative. It's a great website.
You show all the levels too, which is nice.
If I can make it that far. And back then, especially with some of the emulators, it was impossible. I could do it on the real thing, but I didn't have a good digital camera, and the screenshots didn't look that good. Now, some of the emulators have gotten better. We've got proper joysticks that work with some of them, so that's another reason to get back into it, because I think I could start finishing off some of the levels that I don't have on there now, and I could probably do better on some of the games that I was so bad at that I couldn't even take one screenshot, like the title screen. That's about as far as I can get. So.
Oh yeah, no doubt. Some of those games are hard. Yeah.
Well, maybe we can get Steve to help with playing.
We'll never get off the first level. We do that. The title screen and the game over screen. That's all you get.
Oh, Lord. Well, so a couple of years ago, this kind of funny guy started making these videos and on YouTube. I assume you probably hit on him about the time we did. What did you think of that at first? Steve's games on YouTube and CoCo stuff. Were you surprised?
It was a mixed bag. It was really good that he was doing CoCo videos, because that was one machine that did not get a lot of support with old video games being played on YouTube. There was a few other people that did it. There's a guy in England that does. How does he describe it? I play games really badly. He's even worse than Steve, so he's accurate. And he swears a lot too, which Steve rage quits too, so it's kind of a common theme, I guess. But it was impressive that he was doing it, and he was going through his nostalgia childhood stuff, which is the same reason I did the webpage in the first place. And but I also noticed that he didn't have a lot of knowledge of the history of some of them.
Sure.
So he had a lot of inaccuracies, and sometimes he didn't read the manuals, and he still doesn't to this day. So he'd occasionally get a game and try playing and get frustrated. This game sucks. I can't do anything with it. Well, that's because you're not playing it right. So.
The fire button is a space bar.
Yeah, that kind of thing. Yeah. What do you mean? There's a left turn control? What? So at the first time I met him, I was leaving comments on some of his videos, corrections or tips and tricks, and maybe a little bit of the history of the game, and then pointed him to my website. So we started using that as a reference too, which helped. And then he wanted to go through some of the joystick controllers, because he just remembered basically the Deluxe and the Black Beauties. And I said, well, Radio Shack actually sold a bunch more than that, and there's some third-party ones too. And he said, I never knew about that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So then we set up to do our first interview together, a video one, and that's when I kind of did demos of like the Wyco trackball controller and the pistol grip joystick and some of the other ones. So that's kind of what started the whole relationship off. Then we just started guesting on game videos and stuff, and then the podcast came out of that. And
cool.
And you've all suffered ever since.
Yeah. Well, so it's at least it's voluntary suffering, right? We can all turn it off.
Yeah, you can always turn us off.
So I'm kind of still amazed. I don't think anybody expected the chit chat before CoCo Fest to turn in. Well, it was a weekly thing early on, but I don't think anybody expected it to go on for a week after week. Were you at all surprised by that?
Yes. we originally planned to do some shows just to kind of drum up the interest in CoCo Fest, and also for anybody that was releasing any new products, if they didn't want to keep it a surprise right till the fest itself, they could do a preview.
Sure.
To encourage people to go and to buy the stuff. So we were expecting we would probably do a few shows afterwards, just to kind of summarize what happened and maybe run through some of the new products as they came out, or some interviews with some interesting people we met down there. But I don't think either of us really expected the show to continue and not be just complete blather, 90% maybe, but not complete blather. But actually, there's enough happening, and there's enough excitement in the CoCo world in general right now that we keep finding stuff to talk about.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's why you guys have 5-hour episodes now, too. So.
That's true. Well, I mean, it is funny. That used to be one of, and probably still is, some of our feedback is, your episodes are too long or whatever. It's like, well, what part should we have left out is really kind of what it comes down to. But it is kind of amazing how much activity there is. The news segments are so long or whatever. It seems like there's always something going on. Maybe we don't have the highest bar for for covering stuff, but still, there's stuff to talk about that's not just random chit chat, and it's usually something worthwhile.
Yeah, and one segment you do in particular that I really do like, and Steve and I've talked about this, and he agrees with it too, is that you'll bring in a story of something that would be cool if it was on the CoCo, but isn't about the CoCo right at the moment.
Right.
And you'll bring up something that was done on a Commodore or an Apple II or a Tier City Model 3 or whatever. And that has actually sometimes inspired people to go, oh, yeah, we should do that. So that's been a really nice thing. We don't tend to concentrate on that side of things that much, so I'm glad you do that.
Yeah. That's cool. We've got one this month that's where someone did a machine learning on a Commodore 64. So we're hoping to see a network of CoCos pop up and solve some big problems.
like Spectre and Meltdown.
Well, there you go.
Yeah, I've been needing a program to recognize dot matrix numbers. So.
Exactly.
Could have used that at work.
Yeah, okay, there you go.
So I don't want to delve into too much of a technical discussion, but obviously Curtis and I have OS 9 in common and the work on it. But before I get to that, Curtis, you attended the Rainbow Fests, right?
Yeah, I went to Rainbow Fest from 86 till, what was the last one, 90 or 91?
And did you go to the ones in Chicago and was it Brunswick, New Jersey?
No, just the ones in Chicago. I couldn't afford to go to both.
So I'm just curious. Tell me, what were your impressions of those fests? I've never been to one because I just wasn't able to go until a little later. Curious about what you thought about
the biggest difference between those and even the first CoCo Fest was the size. Now, by the last one or two, it's starting to die down. But the first one I went to in '86, the year before the CoCo 3 was at its first show, because this was in April or May, I think it was, and the CoCo got released later. CoCo 3 got released later. There was literally like 13,000 people. It was wall-to-wall packed, and it was a huge Hyatt Regency Woodfield, if you've ever been to the one across from the Woodfield Mall in Chicago, or Schaumburg to be technical. I mean, we were in that hotel at the same time that the Chicago Bears were. Mm-hmm. So there's, these big, huge football players with two gorgeous women, on each arm type thing, mixing up with 10,000 geeks that are rented out the major part of the hall. And it was just packed. I remember the first one, I think it was the Saturday, the early afternoon, you literally could not move. I mean, you were elbow to elbow. It was just that packed.
Did you say 12 to 13,000 people?
Yeah, I mean, that was the official Rainbow attendance. I mean, Steve has mentioned that they did count people twice. So you could take that in half and then add a bit, because not, everybody was there both days. But it was still in the thousands and thousands. It was like at least 8,000 unique people. And the first fest after the CoCo 3 was announced, that was a joy to go to too. I don't think it was quite as big as the one the year before, but the excitement was palpable like throughout.
That would have been 87.
7, yeah. I mean, Steve was there, Rick was there, a bunch of others were there, Marty Goodman, all the rest, and everybody was just all hyped up of what you could do with this new machine.
It's sort of an aspirational question. As far as the current state of Nitrous 9, you're kind of getting back into it, which I think is great, because it could use some additional interest in terms of developing it and bringing it further. What do you see as the things you would like it to do going forward, kind of the grand visions of the operating system? What are your thoughts on that?
I think much of it's probably in sync with yours. I mean, expanding development tools and getting some larger scale apps done. What I'm trying to focus on right now is kind of the part of the ease of use project, and this was inspired by Nick Marentes, because I mean Nick had sometimes called me on Skype. He said, I heard there's this program that sounds pretty cool. It's under OS 9. I'm going to install it. Can you just help guide me through? Because he's not familiar with OS 9. And then some install script would go batty, and then he's like Steve. He rage quits pretty quick, and he would just this stupid operating system. It can't install nothing. This always happens, and that was his major complaint for years. And I finally, when I was getting back into it, said, you know what, we do need to make this, because there's this divide. And this has been around since the 80s. I mean, the divide between the RS-DOS, Disk Extended Basic, and the OS 9 crowd, and kind of poo-pooing each other. I mean, the game players or game writers are saying, we can't use OS 9. It slows me down too much. And the OS 9 people are saying, well, we can write stuff like on zip and have real terminal programs and, that kind of thing. So there's always been this kind of divide. And I was trying to come up with a way to make it a bit more user-friendly. The install process for a lot of stuff, because of different drive paths and people have their systems set up differently with different font colors as defaults and everything else, kind of made it hard. So what we decided to do, after some discussion between a few of us, was we're going to create a hard drive image, which means we don't have to worry about dealing with floppies and what you can fit on a floppy. And I have to load this from this floppy and then swap them to get this to work and that kind of stuff. That was one thing, was that we're going to create a hard drive image so we don't have those limitations. Two, and this was kind of inspired by Kevin Darling when he wrote his little history of the OS 9 Level 2 upgrade that he published on CompuServe years back, is that one thing he kind of regretted, even before it got canceled, was that they were trying to write it in the spec to still run under 120K. And he said it's not really designed to run in 120K. It can, but you're crippling it. It's like trying to run, Windows on a 2 gig machine these days or something.
Mm-hmm.
So we decided, well, we're going to make 512K the base for this ease of use thing, because then you don't have to worry about running out of memory every time you try to run something. And
sure.
And it just makes things a heck of a lot easier. So that's the base we went with, and then I decided I'm going to start pre-installing stuff. I decided to use Multiview. There's some other alternatives out there like MShell, but MShell is more of a file manager. It's not a program launcher. And to get people that are totally alien to OS 9 and don't use Linux and don't use the command line in Windows or Mac, we wanted to get a point-and-click interface. And we are going to install MShell on it, so if you have to do a bunch of file manipulation, it's a lot better at it than G-Shell and Multiview will ever be. But I wanted to have something that you could just double-click a program to launch it, double-click to go into a folder. And I'd already done work on G-Shell, back in the late 90s.
I remember that.
So we've been just basically getting the basic stuff set up. I've got into G-Shell, and I've been making some notes of some additions and changes I want to do, and some I discussed like 17, 18 years ago when I was passing the Nitrous 9 stuff off to you. So I'm going to start implementing some of that stuff too. But basically just have it so that once this entire project is done, it's going to have like just about every program we can find, every game, every app, every utility that's GUI based, and even the ones that are command line based, and have it all installed with all the paths ready, pre-set up, and then just give some directions. If you want to run the C compiler, this is how you do it. If you want to run Basic 09 with this graphics library, this is how you do that. And have it all set up so that people just download this one big hard drive image, and they can install it on a CoCo SDC for real hardware. They can install it in MAME. They can install a VCC and just run it. And if they can get as technical into it as they want, we're going to put everything on there. So if you want to carry on like you and I have been doing assembly and C and everything else, go right ahead. Right. If you just want to play all the old games, that's fine too. It's set up to cover everybody is what we're trying to do.
Yeah, so that's an interesting point. I think that you made a good point about ease of use being the sort of the aspirational goal is to make it so that anybody can just start using it right away. I think what makes OS 9 interesting, and I don't know if you agree with me or not, but is that I think OS 9 as an operating system is very cool, very powerful, but the CoCo is like squeezing on both sides, constraining it, and I think it was starting to kind of it was trying to do too much with too little, especially when you're talking about OS 9 Level 2 and Multiview. And it was very interesting work. It was almost academic in nature to be able to get the operating system to a point where you could say there is a multi-user, multitasking OS running on this 8/16-bit computer, which was very cool, right? Mm-hmm. But at some point, you get it sort of starts popping around the seams, and there's not a lot of utility you can get out of it, because the memory limitation of the 6809 being a 64K address space for processors to live in, even though there are ways to get around that, and B, the speed at which the processor runs, right?
Yeah.
When you see OS 9 running on like, a fast modern PC or ARM board or things like that, it's a totally different experience.
Yep. And we did fiddle with OS 9000 at work a little bit, briefly.
Yeah.
One thing I missed on it, though, was the windowing system. Not the graphical part, but just hitting the clear key to go between hardware windows.
Yes.
Like, that's lickety fast.
Yeah.
And it ran great. So, I mean, like I said, we did run the business on it for 10 years. So, up until, I think we finally retired it around 2000, 2001. But yeah, no, you've got a good point there. And I mean, part of it's the retroness of it all. I mean, part of it's going back to my childhood, or early adulthood anyway. And part of it's the, and I'm sure you probably feel the same way in some ways, that you've always wondered if you had the skill level back then, or if other people had the skill level programming back then that, say, a Sockmaster or somebody else does these days, what could the CoCo have done, the what-if scenario? If we could have released Donkey Kong in 1987, as opposed to, in the 2000s, like what would have changed for Radio Shack? What would have changed for the market? Right. And I've always had that curiosity, like how far could you push the machine? How far could you push the operating system? And that's part of the reason I'm doing it. And then part of it's just the retro in general. Just I enjoy revisiting it, and also seeing that it was competitive at the time. But I don't expect to retire my Mac here for work and start running on my CoCo again.
No, of course not. Of course not. I think you're right. I think it's just the longing to see something to completion that you've always wanted to see in your childhood, but either because of obviously lack of fast hardware that allows us to assemble and compile in a cross-hosted manner very, very fast and iteratively develop at a rate that was unheard of back then. And to see all of that come together and to watch it run on a CoCo and make it do the things you wish it would have done back then that it could have done.
Yes.
Had the bits on the floppy been arranged in the right way, right? Which is ultimately what we're doing. We're fighting to basically get this one huge number at a certain arrangement so we can have the software run correctly. But now we can do that much faster. So I think that's the drive for me and others, is to see that run.
Yep. Yep, that's the same thing here. I mean, even if I'm using the built-in stock tools, which I do a little bit, probably more so than you guys do, just because of the nostalgia, and also I'm too lazy to learn all the new stuff. But just firing up VCC and cranking the simulated megahertz way up. I mean, I can ASM even the rogue source, which is 400 or 500K at this point with comments. It's done literally in 5 seconds.
Yeah, it's just amazingly fast.
Since I think you kind of touched on this, you're talking about playing the old games or whatever. So moving some of the games, like the stuff that was actually in the stocked on the shelves, but for OS 9 games offered by Radio Shack back in the day, moving them forward to play on Nitrous 9, it seems like there's at least a handful of weird issues that pop up. And I'm not sure. It seems like I've heard you talk about some with Rogue. Seems like there's another one that's been particularly problematic that I know Barry Nelson had talked about. I forget which one it is now, and usually they're solved by something, a little esoteric, using a different driver descriptor or changing the descriptors to point so it's this way or that or whatever. Is this something that has to be solved, in a one-off sort of fashion for each game, or are there more systemic kinds of approaches that can be taken to make sure that compatibility remains while the operating system advances?
It depends on the game. There's bits of both. Some of them can be solved with better driver support. I mean, Bruce Eisted did that a bit when he did the VRN driver, which covers the Sierra games and Flight Sim 2, which is basically for timer stuff. Cave Walker, which I think the ones you're referring to that Barry Nelson was having problems with here, is the reason it doesn't work is because it's hard coded. And it's hard-coded to reprogram the PIA interrupt, kind of bypassing OS 9 entirely. And that definitely causes problems on level 2 Nitrous 9 because we've changed and optimized the entire IRQ handling system so that it doesn't quite work the way Cave Walker's expecting it to. So that one's going to be an individual patch, but the reason it needs it is because they cheated in the first place. They're completely bypassing the OS.
Right.
So it's on a case-by-case basis. Like Home Publisher, I had to patch for Nitrous 9 too because they installed a whole bunch of their own software interrupt replacement routines and some additional ones. So the register stacks for native mode were all wrong. So it was crashing left and right when we first did it. So I had to disassemble that figure out what all these new calls were, change register stack offsets to accommodate the E and F registers, and then it started working. And didn't speed it up much because it's pretty sloppily written, but yeah, it's somewhere on an individual case-by-case basis. I think some of the stuff, like I do want to tackle the Sierra one. I know Robert Gall did some patches for it to run it on greater than 512K because it was also hard-coded to read MMU registers directly off the gimme. And of course, the 1 meg and 2 meg boards don't give you those extra bits to on read.
Right.
So it gets back the incorrect results and then starts really screwing itself up. And I also want to do a 6-run optimization of it too, and that's something I want to do on a couple specific games or lines of games. Like Sierra is really enticing that way because the one set of programs will basically drive a dozen games. So if I can optimize that for native mode 6.309 and actually put some 6.309 specific instructions there, I think the playability of those games will go up quite a bit because they'll be closer to what a Tandy 1000 would have had at the time.
You may want to look at patching in support for the SN76489 sound generator.
Yep, actually, I have already thought about that.
Yeah.
John Strong and I had some discussions at the last fest about the various sound cards that are coming out, and then what would be the proper way driver-wise to implement them. And we can replace the current tone command and maybe expand on it, but maybe we should do two different versions, like we were talking about for compatibility, because some Basic 09 games were written where the sound, because it halts the program, the game has been designed speed-wise and playability-wise that sound does have to pause you. So if we just offset a new driver that just does it in the background, all of a sudden you don't have that pause, and you run off the edge of a cliff or something like that instantly.
Right.
So we were talking about, well, maybe we'll set a little flag or maybe make an alternate call that you can use if you want something, or even just a GIP2 system call to add some more global parameters. Maybe you can set, either globally or on a process-by-process basis. We want this one to run the sound in the background, so we're not stopping or pausing or anything else. For certain games, that would work great. And then for others, we'll go in a compatibility mode type thing where it'll still pause properly so that the game is still playable. And then doing extended calls like for multi-voice and playing background music and switching what score you're doing on the fly or whatever.
We sent Boise a Game Master card, and he picked up a different project.
Sorry. Yeah. I go where my passions guide me.
Yeah.
But yeah, I know John and I were talking about that at the last fest and trying to come up with some ways to do it so that it's both compatible and also future forward looking at the same time. And
so that'd be cool.
We had some pretty good ideas on it. And I think because this is going to be driver based, we can make individual sound driv modules for the various cards so that everybody can use the same enhanced programs and it doesn't matter which card you got.
Well, could you even have a virtual card that just spawned the process that did the sound generation, manually or whatever?
You could do something like that. I know Nick was talking about experimenting with that even in Disk Basic for his upcoming game project.
Mm-hmm.
But with all of his moving and stuff, he's kind of on hold on that. So
Sure.
But abstracting it, that's the whole point of having the driver system is to abstract the hardware so you don't have to program for a specific register at a specific memory location.
Oh, yeah. Neo, you're still quiet, man.
Oh, I'm enjoying this. This is a great conversation here.
In other words, we bored you to sleep already, right?
Oh no, I'm very interested in this, and especially this 76489. That'd be really cool to see that up and running. If those Tandy 1000 Sierra games can do it, I know the CoCo can.
Yeah.
I was actually looking at the Sierra sound format, trying to decipher it. There's different formats based, I think, on different computers. I'm not exactly sure how the CoCo's is. It's embedded in those vol files. I know that.
Yeah, from what I've seen, it's got the capability. Was it 3 voice at once, and then the CoCo picks the main front voice or whatever it is?
Yeah, that could be inside of MNLN.
Yeah, mainline.
In the main line there's a routines that tickle the sound register, the FF. I forgot what the PI address is, but anyway, so it's there. You can see it, and of course interrupts are masked, so you get this. The CoCo basically freezes while the sound is playing.
Yeah, it plays smoother than the standard tone command does.
Oh yeah, because the tone command still has. I think the tone command is not shutting off interrupts while it's.
No, it's basically just using the 60 hertz.
Yeah.
Timer.
Yeah, so you get this kind of this really vibration kind of sound.
Yeah, and the tones in the Sierra games are smooth because, like you said, they do shut the interrupts off. But that's one thing that kind of bogs me on it. If you're going to bother doing that and shutting off the interrupts, why didn't you go for multi-voice?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't understand why they did that, but
took the lazy way out, maybe, I guess.
Or weren't familiar. I mean, looking through the Rogue source code, you can either tell there's either multiple people programmed it or somebody was learning the 609 as he was going, because there's some routines that are just retarded. It's from a 609 programmer's standpoint, and then you can see other routines. Oh, that's pretty smart. So it could be it was done different chunks by different people, or if it was one person as they got through 40K of code, they've eventually learned quite a bit. And there's little chunks of a bit of a C compiler printf in there too.
Oh, really? Yeah. So you think Rogue was written in C?
No, it was written in assembly, but I think the ports, most of the other bigger systems like the Amiga and stuff all were done in C.
Yeah.
So I think the data files I think are definitely C based, because you can see like percent signs with all the different C syntax, and they have a little mini interpreter inside of it for doing specific like %D and strings and stuff like that. So I think they took the C files that were created for the C versions on other platforms and then implemented enough of the printf C functionality to cover what they needed on the CoCo. And there's a vector table, kind of like Basic 9 has set up to call all these different functions, and it pushes all the stuff in the stack just like the C compilers do, and then passes it on. So yeah, it's got a little bit of it. There's also got the entire debug mode in there. There's some extra debug code that's never called. It was just, I think they just manually did a jump to it whenever they wanted to like do a register dump or something. Really? So the program is quite a bit bigger than it had to be for distribution. They left the entire debugging mode in there.
Now, I suspect the Sierra code was C based on how it looks whenever it's in the disassembly. Have you verified that yourself?
I haven't gone too much into it yet because I want to finish some of this other stuff first.
Yeah.
But yeah, I suspect that's probably true.
The guy that did that, by the way, was
Chris Iden, or?
Yeah, well, that's the name in the I guess embedded in the binary. But the guy who did the disassembly some years back for the project was, I think his name was Paul Zabalia.
Okay, yeah.
And I haven't seen him around. I don't know where Paul is these days. But he actually did the disassembly of those. But as you know, disassembling C, it's a little more involved in terms of commenting because it's a little fatter code.
And everything's stack based, and you got to sometimes do multiple levels deep and figure out this is an RTS address in the middle of this stack, and
yeah.
So, G Shell's like that too, because when Kent Myers disassembled it for the version 2 or version 3 upgrade, he went and optimized the malloc and some of the other stuff they were already familiar with.
Was there an attempt to rewrite G Shell in C? Did someone do that, or am I misremembering?
I know somebody had announced that we're going to try to do it, but I don't know if that ever went any further.
See,
the only one I've seen is the one that Kent did, which is a disassembly of a C program.
Right. It's a disassembly and modification, but with CMOC, I think that would be the way to go, is to really go back to the model of using C for those multi-view programs like G Shell, Gcalc, Gcal, and things like that.
Yeah, it's too bad we didn't have the source, because it'd be nice to have the base to start with. Having to do it all from scratch.
What sort of work are you doing on Rogue?
Well, I did a couple quick patches, and two of them. Well, one of them is the cheat mode enable, which actually is a hack somebody did years and years ago. You just change a branch test instruction. Actually, what you're supposed to do is change the data file, because there's one byte flag in there that tells you whether cheat mode is enabled or not. Wow. And then I was also always annoyed with Rogue that they made this nice, cool graphics font for Rogue, and then it only runs on an 80 by 24 2-color screen. If you use any other resolution besides that, you use a 4-color screen, you do an 80 by 25, nope, you're back to normal text font.
That's right.
So I've changed it so that if it's in any graphics mode, whether you're running on a 40-column screen or one of those mini 20 by 12 windows, it uses the graphics font for all that.
Oh, that's awesome.
That was my original impetus for it, and the current Alpha 2 ease of use does have that patch in there. And then I just kind of got into it, and Rogue for me has an historic value, because it was the very first version of OS 9 Level 2 for the CoCo that ever got released. It came out, I think, a month and a half or 2 months before OS 9 Level 2 itself came out.
Right.
And I remember on CompuServe at the time, Kevin Darling and Lamardo and a bunch of the others there were disassembling the crap out of it, because it was the only thing with the windowing system with GraphInt and stuff. And these were pre-release versions too, because the GraphInt and GraphDriv on the Rogue original discs is different than the OS 9 Level 2 final release. So it was actually in a state of flux still at that point. but they got it out the door a couple months before the actual full level 2. So it has historical value.
Right.
That, for the nostalgia buffs, that was how the entire disassembly of level 2 and learning how the whole system worked inside and out started. And then I also promised Brett Gordon, I said, what size of a program can you run in Fuzzix, whatever you want to call it? And he said, you can fit about a 60K because there's about a 4K chunk that they reserve for their kernel in all process spaces. And I'm trying to crunch it down enough so you can fit that in there and you can port Rogue over to it too.
Oh, that'd be awesome.
And if I rip the debugging mode stuff out, I'm pretty sure I can make that. I've already crunched it over a K so far. So, and then I got a whole bunch of stuff for G-Shell. I think, Boise, if you remember that doc I sent you back in, 2001 or something there's a few bits in there I still plan on doing. So
I don't remember what I did last year, let alone.
I still have a printout of it here, so.
To jog your memory.
Well, yeah, that's good, though. I mean, I still think, like I said, getting a C version would be some work, but man, the dividends would pay off once it was done. So.
Yeah, and definitely for all the little bits inside, like the mini apps that come with it, definitely those should be done. I don't feel like disassembling GCal or.
Yeah, exactly.
And then I still got to get back to my Rescue and Fractalist 639 optimization project. I've been optimizing for 6809 because that was another job.
What are you doing with that? You alluded to Rescue and Fractalist. Can you tell us what's going on with that?
Well, I wanted to speed it up because, it's a decent 3D game, but it's a little slow. And it's quite a bit faster than the other 8-bit machines even. It's 6502. I mean, that's a burn in my saddle as 6502 games outperforming us. Even if they have, special graphics chips and stuff. So I decided I was going to go through. My first plan was just to optimize the 6309. But then I was taking a look at the code, and once again, this was a project that had a hard deadline of 6 weeks. And Ken Rogaway, who I did briefly get in contact with, said it took him 6 weeks to do that one. It took him 4 weeks to do Coronis, which was based on a slightly later version of the same rough engine.
Wow.
And he'd never touched a 609 before in his life.
Wow, that's
did
impressive.
he write that in assembly, or did he write it doing
Totally assembly.
Wow. Oh, wow.
Now, he was an experienced 6502, 6510, etc. So, he had experience in assembly language, but he'd never touched 6809. He quite liked the chip, actually. He was quite, fluorescent in his praise of it. But he admitted it was rushed because they had a hard deadline to meet. And I've crunched that one down. I can't remember how much I've crunched in size-wise, but David Ladd's got a video running under VCC where he shows stock OS9 running Rescue on the left, 609 optimized version running on stock in the middle, and 6809 running under Nitrous 9 6309 on the right. And it's basically about a 10 to 12% speed increase across each of those chunks. So on native mode right now, it's running about almost 25% faster already.
Wow, that's amazing.
And even on the 6809, it's running about 10 to 12% faster. And I'm not done optimizing it yet either. And I haven't put any specific 639 code in it yet either.
What are some of the things you saw that needed optimization?
Well, both Rogue and Rescue, I think because they're used to the 6502 where you have to do weird things to, access more than an 8-bit range around where you are. Mm-hmm. They do a whole bunch of extended addressing and extended 16-bit indexed offsets all over the place. Even if the code it's pointing to is, or the data it's pointing to is like 10 bytes away, they sometimes use a 16-bit offset, and that's a penalty of like an extra 4 cycles per instruction.
Right.
Rogue in particular, they don't use direct page at all.
Yeah.
So it's always using extended addressing. There's not a single, I think there's a very brief little bit of DP right when they first try to copy the parameter string over when you launch it. And that's it. And direct page saves you about a cycle per instruction.
Yeah.
So I've been doing that on both of those projects, is adding in direct page. In Rescue's case, there's certain chunks of the code dealing with different parts of the 3D rendering and stuff that it stays in this routine for a long time, and it's accessing this particular chunk of RAM. So I just changed direct page to map into there. So that whole routine or set of routines runs faster, and then it pops back to whatever it needs for normal. And in Rogue, I'm still deciding where I'm going to stick that in there because I'm probably not going to change it on the fly like I'm doing on Rescue. Probably just pick one or two spots, like all the player data, for example, that gets checked constantly. But right now, it's all extended addressing. That's most of the 1K plus shrinkage, too, is just, fixing up things, moving things around. Like they put a table, they only access once, and they shove it 4K further down the line in the program, and it's like a 5-byte table. So I just moved it closer, and all of a sudden now it's using 8-bit addressing and shaving 3 cycles off per access in a loop.
Well, if anything, what it sounds like is we ought to cut this interview short, let you get back to work so you can do some good stuff in the community.
What are you doing talking, wasting your time with us?
That's right. Get off of here.
I'm assembling the programs in the background at real CoCo speed, so it's been busy the whole time.
There you go.
You got some time.
We're like you're not standing on top of your chair with a sword dueling your office mate, right? So Curtis, then, well, tell us something we don't know. Tell us, what's your hopes and dreams here for the CoCo world, or what do you want to be when you grow up? That sort of thing.
I want to be 16-bit when I grow up.
Well,
just more the enthusiasm, like the enthusiasm that's come the last few years. I just want to see that continue. Whether it's programming, using, whatever. That's the main thing.
It's always more fun when you have somebody to consume or at least talk about what you've done. We can all do our thing back in the closet or whatever. Well, that's a bad term, but we all do our thing in our basement. Just to have our own little celebrations to ourselves. But it's always nicer if you got a buddy that can at least say, hey, that's kind of cool. Hey, you just wasted your weekend on that stupid thing, but it's kind of cool.
Well, to be honest, Bill and I, we used to have discussions when we were doing Nitrous 9 originally, because we worked together. And our work system was our main test bed. Like if we weren't busy printing, it was like, well, let's do another assembly of the kernel. And we would sometimes get into heated arguments over, semantics of how to do something or what routine we thought would work better or whatever. And sometimes it got quite heated to the point where I remember once one of the pressmen came back and there was a big cement wall between us and the press area. And they were running an 8-color web press at full bore, and they heard us screaming at each other over top the press. And they literally thought they were going to come and have to break up a fist fight because I thought that was going on. It was just us arguing about, what routine would work better in this one particular case. So,
that's pretty funny.
But yeah, we had lots of discussions, and that both rivalry and camaraderie at the same time.
Sure.
You kind of had to prove your point and prove that your idea had merit.
Yeah.
And I've heard some other programming companies and stuff work the same way, where it's competitive even within, and that actually spurs people on as long as you don't let it get too out of hand.
Right.
It spurs them on to better themselves and better what they're doing. Like you're going, well, he just came out with a routine that works a little bit better than yours, so we're going to pick his. And then you go, well, I can make mine better then. And you just and actually it eggs you on to do better in a faster time frame than you would have normally.
Yeah.
So it's like having instant feedback.
Code talk.
Marlette and I, when we worked together closely on SuperDriver and some other Cloud9 stuff, there was that kind of a relationship, where we, one of us would want something, the other one would want to do it, so we, basically him and haw and get him pissed off to the point where he would just say, okay, I'll do it. I did the same thing. It actually made our work better.
Yeah, it did for me and Bill too.
Cool. Well, now you got to go and figure out how to take off Stevie to do improvements to the shows or whatever. And,
I think he's got Steve Bjork helping him with that side of things.
Oh, good. Well, somebody will end up mad, that's for sure.
I prefer to call it discussions, but sure.
So then, Curtis, what have we not asked you? What's your secret?
I did do some other programming in OS 9. Earlier, I did some stuff before I got into Nitrous 9. I did like a machine language unzip utility, and I did some other little quickie utilities too.
Cool.
I did get some stuff published in some of the books that Rainbow did for the adventure and simulation contests. Stuff I did in BASIC back in the earlier 80s. There's two, cool. And those are on the game website too for download if anybody wants to really laugh hysterically at how badly I used to program.
Well, it's always humbling to look at your old code, right?
Yeah, humbling's the right word, sure. Yeah. Embarrassing would be closer, but yeah, I mean, I've been programming on since I think 78 was the first year I ever got to touch a PET. And we had one that cycled through our public school system. Every school had it for 2 weeks. One pet. And like most of the students there were like, nah, I got an Atari VCS at home. What do I want to see this black and white thing? But a few of us really fell in love with it, and it turned into careers. So.
Yeah. Well, let me try one more here. So my impression is that Saskatoon is a bit remote. Is that correct?
Yeah, we're in the middle of the prairies. We're about 250,000 people, so it's a decent size.
Okay, so it's a decent sized town. I was going to ask, what do you do for fun out there or whatever, but I guess you're still going to ask, what do you do for fun?
Not freeze. No, we got enough stuff here. There's lots of stuff to do. There's like live concerts and stuff, and
sure.
Got, some sports teams. We've got a professional lacrosse team that actually has won the championship recently. We've got a football team in Regina. It's a 2.5-hour drive. Obviously, hockey's big up here, so I remember playing it a lot as a kid until I got into computers, and then I kind of gave up on physical anything. But
well, at least you're still skinny.
Well, I'm working on that too, unfortunately.
All right. Well,
it's time for another coordinated CoCo conference.
All right. Well, on that note, has anybody else got any other questions?
Your Twitch TV appearances with Leo Laporte, are you still doing those or not?
I haven't been down there in a couple of years now.
Okay.
It was basically vacation time, and I've guested on the Tech News Today show during one of their ones where they picked 4 of the audience basically to come and guest on a Christmas special.
Cool.
But no, to be honest, my work life has definitely gotten busier. Like when I started the company after the old ticketing printing when I was in shut down, work started off fairly slow, so I had some time for vacation. Unfortunately, no money to do it with. But now work definitely this last year or two. Sales have been going up about 12-13% a year, so it's definitely getting busier, and I'm having less free time to do that. I still pop in their chat room once in a while. I still listen to the shows, but not as actively involved as I used to be. That and Steve's taking up all my damn time. But
yeah.
One regret. I will tell you one story. I did take CoCo's down to Leo back when he was still in the the middle building, I guess. And we had a bit. Ustream used to kind of live tape everything, including between shows. And you can get them on the could have gotten them on the web. And I took the CoCo's down there, and then Burke and I actually set it up so we hooked it up to the TriCaster, and we actually had CoCo running a little TWIT demo I wrote in BASIC on every single screen in the entire building. And we filmed that, and then Leo came out in between shows just after Security Now, and he actually came and he remembered the CoCo a little bit. He knew a little bit about it on his own. And I showed him some programs and, kind of gave him a bit of the history and stuff on it. And that was a pretty cool thing they had. And then, maybe it wasn't Ustream, it was Justin TV. When Justin TV shut down, they deleted all that stuff, and I didn't grab it first, which I should have, because that's totally gone now. I do have a couple snapshots from it, I think, on my Google Plus page. Yeah. But the actual interview with Leo, using the CoCo and talking about it is all gone, unfortunately. That's one big regret.
You can't get that over on CoCo TV?
Well, if I'd grabbed the video and downloaded it first, I might have been able to. But no, I didn't. I didn't think about it. Like, I remember heard about that they were shutting down Justin TV, and it just never dawned on me that all the content would disappear at the same time. I just thought they'd sell it to somebody else and somebody else would carry on. But nope, it was all wiped.
Oh well. It's a shame it didn't happen at PinFest 2000 because somebody would have video of it.
Well, I remember when I was doing my TC9 seminar there, you were sitting right close to the TC9 in there because Nick sent me a copy of the video for that. So I had met you before.
Yeah, met you there. That was my first CoCo event.
Oh, was it?
I thought all you guys were crazy up until
Now we are, but
yeah, well, that was after PinFest shut down. I said, well, I better start going out to Chicago because they're not going to do those CoCo Fest forever. So far, I've been wrong. Oh well.
Yeah. Well, I'm really glad I made it to Rainbow Fest a few times before it folded, though, because that was a whole other level of show.
Yeah, that would be cool.
Not Comdex level, because I've been to that too, but
yeah. Oh well.
And now we have proof that John was actually at PenFest.
Yeah, well, we've got that one picture of him carrying that box, but you can actually hear him asking me questions during the TC9 seminar that Nick sent me a copy of the video for. So.
Oh, that's cool.
Cool.
Oh, they weren't too stupid.
No. My answers were, but
Yeah,
plus I had my mullet then, so that didn't really go well.
Oh. Well, I think we'll probably draw this to a close then. Curtis, definitely thank you for joining us. It's been a good discussion and been a lot of fun, some good reminiscing, and some good information exchange.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, even if it's dead last out of the hosts on the other show.
Well, you know,
like I said, you saved the worst for last. So
quality is not always reflected by order. So anyway, well, like I said, thanks for joining us. I think it's been a good interview.
The International Color Computer Weather Service has issued the following alert for Earth's northern hemisphere, above approximately 26 degrees north latitude. Effective until 8 p.m. May 1st. Cooler temperatures combined with fewer daylight hours have created conditions conducive to indoor activity. Seasonal affective disorder is a type of depression that typically occurs each year during fall and winter. To combat these and other possible effects, hibernate indoors and use a TRS-80 color computer, MC10, Dragon, or similar color computer, as frequently as possible. Exposure to colors such as green, magenta, buff, cyan, and orange have been shown to offer relief from the effects of seasonal affective disorder. Owners of color computers should go to a basement or interior room in your home or business where you keep color computer equipment. Seek shelter now. Once in place, use your color computer to program, play games, or otherwise pursue creative activities. You may enhance your experience by reading computer publications and manuals, listening to vintage computing podcasts, soldering electronic parts to printed circuit boards, employing oscilloscopes, voltmeters, logic analyzers, and other tools. Interacting with other color computer owners can also be useful in combating seasonal affective disorder. Planning and creating projects or demonstrations to exhibit at CoCo Fest and Tandy Assembly is also strongly recommended. The International Color Computer Weather Service has issued this alert.
All right, welcome back. I'm John, and this is our tech segment for this episode. This time we're going to do a little talking about something, well, it's a bit of a ringer, shall we say. This is talking about a product that I'm actually the producer, designer on. Of course, it's not actually a product unto itself per se, but it's more of a technology to enable people to produce what are hopefully better games. So anyway, if you haven't guessed by now, I'm talking about what I call my Game Master cartridge, or Game Master cart. It's funny, I feel like I've been talking about this for forever, and even looking back, some of the earliest videos, demonstrations I posted go back to last January, so I've been talking about it roughly a year. And yet, we still seem to see a lot of people who say, oh, that's neat, what's that? What does it do? Why would you do that? That sort of thing. So, I don't know, some of those people may just not pay a lot of attention anyway, but just in case, we'll try to cover it, or I'll try to cover it more fully in this segment. So, what are we talking about? Well, quite literally, as many of you listening will know, I enjoy games on cartridge, which is in its simplest form is a ROM cartridge, which is a little piece of printed circuit board extension that plugs into a connector on the side of the CoCo and extends it with a ROM chip, which is a read-only memory that contains the code for a game. But since what you're literally doing is extending the circuitry of the color computer, that cartridge can be more than just a ROM, and of course we all know that because we've seen floppy disk controllers and sound cards and the XY adapter or whatever, so probably not conveying anything really there new to you, but my point being that games can have or can make use of resources that simply aren't present on the color computer to begin with. And so one thing that other contemporary systems did to resolve similar problems in their cases was to add hardware on the cartridge. That's what we're doing here. So, because everything needs a name nowadays, and because, I've called this the Game Master cart. Some people have been calling it the CoCo GMC. I pretty much try to call it just the GMC because I think sticking CoCo on the beginning of every name for the products for the color computer gets a little old. If you want to call it the CoCo GMC, you go ahead. Anyway, so it's a cartridge circuit board. It's not a game unto itself. You can put whatever game on there you want. But it is hardware that contains, the hardware expands the ROM addressing that's available, so you can put a bigger game on the cartridge. And it includes a sound chip so that you can make better sounds. Like I said, this is intended to be packaged as part of a game, so you're not really buying the Game Master cartridge per se. You're buying the game. The game's delivered on the Game Master cartridge for the better experience, and that enables a game to know that it's got certain hardware available and not have to worry about trying to adapt to exactly what variation of things you have in your system or don't have at all. So with that said, an alternative that is plausible, or some variation of which is plausible, is it can be used basically as a standalone cartridge or a standalone sound card. So basically you would just either ignore the ROM, basically have no ROM in there, or a ROM that maybe stays out of the way most of the time, or possibly a ROM that actually has some kind of, say, chiptune audio player on it or something like that, and then drives the hardware just for the purpose of playing music, like a chiptune player or, whatever other kind of music output you might ever want. So that's an alternative. It's not really what the card is designed for. Like I said, it's designed to be a delivery device for games. So why did I want this in the first place? A year or two ago, when I started thinking about this sort of thing, I'd already been delivering new PCBs or new game cartridges wrapped in plastic. I thought it was a great thing. I still do. But, there's always those naysayers or negative people out there, and there's one of the complaints that several of them echoed was, well, that's great, but if you're going to deliver a game on cartridge, it can only be so big. So, well, that's sort of true. I mean, you're going to have a limitation at some point. But it doesn't have to be as small as you get with just the standard hardware. So one of the motivations of delivering a new game cartridge was to overcome the limitations. And the standard way of overcoming address size limitations on the computers of this era, or maybe computers of all eras, is through something called bank switching, which basically treats each chunks of memory and it calls them banks. I'm not really sure where the term comes from, but a bank is like a block, or well, I think we all understand the term bank. So we'll just say it's more than one bank of memory. Instead of having the single bank of memory hanging off the card slot, you basically use the circuitry on the card to divide it up into multiple banks of memory, and then have a mechanism so that the address coming into the card gets routed to the appropriate bank, which has the nice effect that if you have a maximum size for addresses coming into the card, however many banks you can put on the card, well, that multiplies the maximum size of memory on the card by that amount. So if you start off with, say, 8K or 16K of a maximum address space on the card, and then you put in hardware for 4 banks, well, now you can put up to 64K of addressable memory, not all at the same time. You have to select each bank individually as you're accessing it, but It's a way to deliver 64K worth of program and data. And that's exactly what we're doing here. Is we've got the Game Master card as it currently stands. Uses a bank switching circuit that was published by Greg Zumwalt in the June 1990 article of Rainbow Magazine. I think it's called Breaking the 32K Barrier. Anyway, he describes how the bank switching works on a couple of games he did, Predator and RoboCop. And so we're using the same mechanism here. Like I said, our maximum is 64K because that's the biggest, that's what you get from a 27C512 EEPROM, which is a 28-pin EEPROM. I think this is the largest capacity 28-pin EEPROM. We could easily go to a bigger EEPROM, go to 128K or more, and we might do that eventually. But let's see if there's actually a need for games of this size first. So there's your challenge. If you want bigger games or bigger EEPROMs, capability on your game cartridges, well, show me that you can use what I've got now. So anyway, that's part of it. Why did we need a new circuit board for games? But the probably the bigger thing here is we wanted to, or I should I say, but I wanted to expand the quality and availability of music in games. And as most of us probably realize, or know whether we realize it or not, but most color computer games don't have, either have no music at all, or they have music at the intro or the ending, but little or nothing while the game actually plays. And there's a few exceptions. Grappler is one. Farfall actually is one. I get a few complaints about the tonal quality of Farfall, but it does play music during the game. But there's not many others. And so the reason why, of course, is that there's no actual, well, the sound hardware on the CoCo is such that it requires the CPU to be involved actively to play any music, and not just selecting which notes to play, but actually selecting or forming the wave pattern, either with the 1-bit output or with the DAC output. But one way or another, the CPU has to decide, when the waves go up and when the waves go down. And so when you're playing music, that happens quite a lot. So it takes a lot of CPU time to make the music, which takes away from gameplay. And that's why and it also makes it difficult to do both music and games and at what feels like at the same time. So that's why you don't see many games with in-game music on the CoCo. And so we've kind of tossed this around for years, and it's pretty well established that people think that it would have been good if Tandy had included a sound chip. Steve Bjork says that was his big demand when the CoCo 3 came about, was he really wanted a sound chip. Mark Siegel, I think, agrees with that history and says, well, instead, for cost reasons, we can't do the sound chip, but we did give you a better interrupt handling structure, which makes up for something. It is a little easier to do interrupt-driven software audio playing on the CoCo 3 than it is on the CoCo 2 because of the way the interrupts work. Does it make it easy? No, it's still kind of difficult. And this still takes up, difficult or not, it still takes up CPU time. But it is there. So many of us acknowledge that there needs to be some better sound hardware on the CoCo, or at least for mini games, it would be preferable. There were some alternatives that were produced by Tandy back in the day that you may be thinking about. There was one called the Orchestra 90 pack, which the Orchestra 90 software is really cool if you're a musician or want to deal with what is effectively sheet music. You can do really cool stuff, but the hardware itself on the Orchestra 90 is not really all that different from what's already on the CoCo. Instead of a 6-bit single-channel DAC, you get 2 8-bit DACs, but that just means you have to process twice as much data in the same period of time. It can sound pretty good, but it doesn't really resolve the issue. If you want to learn more about the Orchestra 90 hardware, you might want to reflect back on the tech segment in episode 10 of the CoCo Crew podcast. There was another option available from Tandy called the Speech Sound Pack. The Speech Sound Pack had a couple of pieces of hardware on there, two of them more interesting than others, I guess, but one was the AY38910. I think it may have been an 8913. They're programmed the same in terms of software. But anyway, it was a sound generator that was using a lot of hardware, and a pretty good one from back in the day. In addition to that, there was also a SPO256 speech processor. And then to save on address space or whatever, there was also an early version of the PIC chip, which has become more famous since then in the microcontroller world. But so anyway, they have an early version of the PIC chip on the board that actually handles communications with the 6809 on the CoCo. This saves you some address space because the AY38910 in particular uses up 19 address slots or something, 16. It's a lot. I'm not sure how many the SPO256 uses, but it, between them, they do use up a lot of address space. That probably doesn't excuse the design, especially because the PIC makes it really slow to program the Speech Sound Pack in terms of trying to drive music. A lot of music players for chiptunes are based on register dumps, and they just update a register, all the registers on the chip on a regular basis. If you try to program the Speech Sound Pack's sound chip that way, it basically just won't keep up. And so you have to figure out how not to update it that regularly if you want to play music on it at all. Now, there are some neat tricks on that card where you can preload music into some buffers and trigger the buffers to play kind of autonomously. So that's kind of cool. I think that's probably Steve Bjork and some others have done using that for games in the past. But I don't know, the hardware's a little bit hard to come by these days, and like I said, the design is questionable. It's a little bit hard to use. Yada yada yada. Not everyone has it. So if you do want to learn more about the Speech Sound Pack, again, you might want to refer back to episode 11, the tech segment there, episode 11 of the CoCo Crew podcast. Anyway, so we touched on that. There's a bit of a problem if you try to add hardware for playing sounds. You have a bit of a chicken and the egg problem. Anyone who wants to play the game and use it has to have the hardware, before they ever play the game. The developer really needs the hardware too. There are some ways around that, and maybe the developers aren't as big an issue because you can afford a few to send out to developers, but really the people playing the game have to have the hardware. And so until the game exists, nobody's going to have the hardware, and then even when the game does exist, not everybody will have played it and thought it was worth buying the hardware. So you need to have the software for people to want to have the hardware, and then you need people to have the hardware for them to want to buy the software. So it's kind of a problem. So my thought was, looking into this over time, I was looking around at different chips. There was some variation in the prices of the kind of chips that we're looking at, the chips that kind of come from that period of time and do this sort of programmable sound generation, usually some tone generation, some of which have a lot more capability of influencing the tone itself. King of all would be, say, a SID chip from Commodore, but those are rather expensive to acquire. Even in onesies, they're pretty expensive. I was looking around at some of the other chips, like the SAA1099, the SN76489, even the AY38910, and its variants like the YM2149. They were had reached a low enough price, or were at a low enough price, that I thought, well, maybe it's practical to put them on the card with the game, and that way, if you buy the game, you've got the chip, because the chip's right there delivered with the software. So it kind of resolves the chicken and the egg problem. But like I said, the prices vary quite a bit. A couple of years ago, I was looking, and like the AY 38910 was, regularly in the $10 range. It looks like now that there's, at least at current times, that has become a bit cheaper, which is good because that's a bit too expensive. Even looking at it, the SA 1099, that was from the old Game Blaster hardware, kind of a predecessor to Sound Blaster. That sells around $2 on eBay for individual chips. The YM2149 looks like it sells around $1.50. That's really not bad, but the SN76489, the chip that Tandy ultimately used on the Tandy 1000, or the IBM PC Junior, it was where it originated, I guess. So T1K is a clone of the PC Junior. Anyway, those chips actually run closer to 50 cents a piece, so that's pretty cheap. So for 50 cents a piece, plus a little extra circuitry, not much, I figured, well, you could add that to the cost of a game cartridge. Not really affect the overall cartridge price, but really affect the value. And so you'd have a game that would be a lot more fun to play, and have hardware that would augment the software. The software would know it has the hardware, so you wouldn't have to guess or do any special configuration to figure that out. So it seems like a good idea. Again, back to why the SN76489, like I said, is about the cheapest one. It had a historical tie to Tandy. And unlike some of the other chips, it required a lot less support circuitry. It didn't really need an external amplifier. It's just a resistor, capacitor here and there for for things. The chip itself is kind of small, whereas the YM2149, I think, is it's a wider, bigger chip. The SN76489 is quite a bit smaller, less real estate on the board, so easier to build the board. The board can be smaller, or you can put more stuff on the board. So there's a win-win there for me. So there you go. So what have we talked about so far? We've talked about the intro of the game card, what does it do, and I'm kind of talking some about why it does it. At this point, I'd like to pause and let's hear a bit of what kind of music you can get from the Game Master cartridge. Alright, so I think that gives a pretty good sample of what sorts of sounds you can get out of the Game Master cartridge. I think it's pretty impressive. Certainly a lot nicer to use than having to throw in a bunch of code to do all that stuff. It leaves a lot more CPU time available, I assure you. So let's talk a bit about, kind of take a little bit more of a technical deep dive. Let's start, I'm looking now at the document I wrote for helping people that want to program the CoCo Game Master cartridge. Starts off talking about bank switching, which we mentioned before. The bank switching is essentially identical to the technique described by Greg Zumwalt in the June 1990 edition of the Rainbow. It's what he used on RoboCop and Predator. In the case of the Game Master cartridge, the maximum ROM capacity is 64K, and that's what you get with a 27C512 EEPROM. The banks are divided into, it's not quite 16K. That's because the hardware in the CoCo will reserve part of the address range, and the FF 00 to FFFF. The CoCo 3 also, you have a similar kind of thing going on from FE00 to FEFF. Anyway, those are not quite accessible in the ROM, so you miss out on that 256 or 512 bytes from each bank. But it definitely extends the capacity quite a bit. The selection register works really simply. There's just a register at hex address FF40. This is the spare cartridge select built into the cartridge port on the CoCo. This would interfere with a floppy controller or something like the CoCo STC. So I figure that's not a problem because this is designed as a cartridge for games. And the whole idea is to pop out everything else and pop in the cartridge, or you can use a multi-pack if you want. Cart select over to that one cartridge. The point being that your game is not using your floppy controller. So I think that's okay. Now, if I was selling it or if I was marketing it as a technology to be used as a standalone sound card, I would definitely want the addressing to be done differently. Some people don't seem to agree on that, but I think that would be an important thing to be different. Anyway, we'll talk about some of the alternatives a little bit later. That pretty much covers the bank switching from a technical perspective. You have the bank select register at FF40, and you just write the bank number in there, 0, 1, 2, 3. And that's all you get is 4 banks, 16K up to 64K total on this version of the card. You could have a bigger bank capacity with a redesigned card that would work similarly, but we don't have that right now. Alright, the next section, though, talks about sound generation. Like I said, the Game Master cartridge provides a Texas Instruments SN76489AN sound generator. Do feel free to look that up, and there's a Wikipedia article about it. This chip was used in a number of contemporary systems, the BBC Micro, the TI-99, it was used in the Tandy 1000, the Sega Master System, a number of arcade games. So, I mean, it has that kind of familiar tonal quality of games from that era. I like it. Let's see, a note here, when you write to the SN76489, it requires 32 cycles of the onboard oscillator worth of time for any write to it to complete successfully. So there's an oscillator on the card so it's a separate clock, different from what the CoCo itself is using. What I'm recommending and what I've built so far uses a 4 megahertz oscillator. Depending on the speed you're running at on the CoCo, you may need a knob or two in there when you write out to the card. A couple of knobs is really not a big deal. If you're down to saving every cycle, sure. But think of all the cycles you're already saving just by using the sound chip. And I think we can afford a few to use as knobs when writing to the chip. You don't have to use knobs for that matter if you can schedule some other instructions in there. Just as long as you have that period of time in between the writes themselves, it'll work fine as well. So, whatever works for you. There's only a single address that's used for writing to the SN7649. Now, the chip itself has 3 oscillators, 3 tone generators, basically, which are essentially just square wave oscillators. And it has a noise channel, which doesn't make a tone. It makes noise. It kind of sounds like percussion or something like that, like a snare drum. It's a little more complicated than the other channels, but you'll have to investigate that yourself if you want to program it. But the point being is there's more than one channel to write to, yet there's only one address, there's only one register address. And so what happens is the data that you write to the register, part of that identifies which channel you're accessing. So it's kind of encoded into the data itself. Anyway, that one register address, it's write only. You can't read back from it. Now, it's kind of a drag if you're trying to read back to detect if the chip is there or not, because there's nothing to answer. It just doesn't answer or read. So there's if there's a way to detect the chip other than try to turn it on and listen, then I don't know what else you would do. To me, that's okay. Again, the whole point is to put it on a game cartridge and ship it with a game, so you don't really need to detect it. But if you wanted to use it in a different application, you may want to figure out some other way to handle that. Anyway, the value of the onboard oscillator frequency is a factor in the values that you write out for the tone generators, meaning that if you change to a different onboard oscillator and don't change your frequency generator settings appropriately, then your tone will not come out the way you want it. Shocking, right? But that's what happens when we talk about variations of the card. That's a possible variation, is you could build a card with a different oscillator. If you do that, then you'll need to account for that with whatever data you're using to program the sounds. Okay, not a big deal. Okay, when you want to write out to the SN7649 on the GMC, that is addressed at hex FF41. Again, we already talked about the addressing and how this would conflict with the floppy drive controller or whatever. It just is what it is. But like I said, the point being that this is supposed to be a game cartridge. It's not really supposed to coexist with other stuff on your massive, awesome OS9 CoCo system or whatever, because it's designed just to play a game. Okay, so I've got a section called System Notes here. Again, to point out, the address decoding uses the SCS signal. Normally that's used by floppy disk controllers or the SDC. If you want to use the GMC with such a card, it is possible if you're using a multi-pack interface. It's not going to work with a Y cable. But if you use a multi-pack interface, you can reroute the SCS signal using the address at hex FF7F. And you can route it back and forth. You can route it to the sound card when you want to play sounds, route it to the floppy controller when you access the floppy, whatever. It just is something that would have to be done. Again, it's sort of outside the point of how the card was designed, but it is possible. So audio output from the SN76489 does go through the sound signal on the CoCo cartridge port. That means that if you want to hear the sound, you're going to have to route the sound output from the cartridge port into the RF modulator or whatever audio output you're using on your CoCo or CoCo 3. There's a pretty simple setup there that involves the mux and the selections signals from the PIAs. You may want to look at the video done by Mike Rowan to get a little more information about how that works. It's pretty simple to run the selection. One other note here, on the SN76489, for whatever reason, the way the chip powers on, by default, it enables all the oscillators. And so, if you're not aware of that and you route the audio to the chip without having done anything to turn those oscillators off, you will get some noise. So when you're programming your game, it's advisable to turn the volume down on all the channels before you switch audio over to it. So just for your own sanity. Okay, I've got a few notes here and playing and composing tunes. You're basically on your own. You're going to have to figure it out yourself. But I will note the chip was used with a variety of contemporary machines. The TI-99-4A, the Sega Master System, BBC Micro, PC Junior, Tandy 1000. I think I've already mentioned all those. The point being is any tunes you find that were composed for those systems, the data that goes along with that, and any tool that's used for the purpose of composing tunes for those systems, you should be able to adapt that whatever data they generate ought to be able to be used with the CoCo and the GMC. So be resourceful and look around for tools for composing for the BBC Micro, for example. You may have some luck. There is a file format out there for video game music that's called VGM format. Part of that format identifies what chip the music data is for, and it has support in there for identifying data for the SN76489. The data file format is pretty well documented, and there are a number of archives of VGM formatted music out on the web. If you want to look for music that can play on the Game Master cartridge, go look for some of that and see if you can figure out how to get the data over. Also, there's a tool out there that I've become aware of recently called Deflamask. It's capital D-E-F-L-E, capital M-A-S-K. It says Deflamask is a cross-platform tracker, runs on Windows, Mac OS X, and Linux for producing music for many sound chips and old-school game consoles/computers. This claims to support the SN76489. You may have to tell it that you're using a 4 MHz clock or whatever speed clock you are using. For what it's worth, the BBC Micro uses the same clock speed for its SN76489, so you may be able to just say you're composing for the BBC Micro. Your mileage may vary. All right. Well, let's see. There's pretty well covers my technical overview on what you do to program the chip or program the device, how you use it. Let's talk a bit about possible variations of the device. So if you wanted to use the basic chip, but if you wanted to build it rather than as a game cartridge, but you wanted to build, say, a standalone sound cartridge, I would think that it would be advisable to use a real addressing scheme. In other words, don't use the SCS signaling. Using SCS is kind of a cheat. It enables there to be less hardware on the card, so that's a big plus. It makes the card cheaper, but it makes it more difficult for the card to coexist with other hardware. And so, like I said, if this was designed as a standalone card and you're going to use this card with a lot of things, and basically if you're going to leave this card plugged in all the time, I think it would make a lot more sense to use a real addressing scheme, a real address, allocate an actual address for the card rather than just relying on SCS. And then you wouldn't have to fool around with any of the switching the slots in the MPI in order to be able to use it with your CoCo SDC or whatever. So that'd be one variant. You could build the same basic card or a version of the card with just a sound chip as a sound card, but you'd want to redesign quite a bit. So this is designed as a game cartridge, and so by default I've got the card wired up to auto start. That works great if you want to put a ROM cartridge, if you want to a ROM image for a game on the cartridge that's expecting to auto start. But if you wanted to, say, use the ROM slot for, say, drive wire or some other DOS style of ROM, then the auto start mechanism doesn't work for DOS style ROMs. And so, if you were going to build a product based around that, we could do a respin of the design that disabled the auto start. And so that might be appropriate. Again, if you were trying to ship a sound card, which you may or may not change the addressing on for the sound chip, but then you could disable the auto start and pop in. You might even ship it with a drive wire ROM or something like that. Notice how I say you might do this. I'm not planning to do this, but these are options. And if you got a great idea for a product, then we could talk about it. I could probably spin the design and help you out. but no guarantees. Let's see. So another variations related to memory. So you could ship one with no ROM socket at all. No place for a ROM. Again, this might be appropriate for a system-style sound card. Something that would be equivalent to Speech Sound Pack or Orchestra 90 or something like that. That's an option. You could build one. You could make the card a little bit smaller if it didn't have a ROM on it. On the other hand, you could go the other way. You could put a bigger ROM on it, or you could put multiple ROMs on it. Either way, meaning you'd have more ROM storage. And so that would enable you to address more banks as well. The chip that's on it could do quite a few more banks. The circuitry that's built in as it is right now, I'd say the ROM chip that fits on it will only do the 4. But anyway, you could put more ROM banks on there. You also could change, if for some reason you didn't like the 16K ROM banks, if you wanted to use 8K ROM banks or 4K or whatever, it wouldn't be too hard to do a version of the card that had a different banking scheme. Why do you want to do that? Well, I don't know. Maybe it's more appropriate or more comfortable for programming your game to do the banking in 8K. It's hard to say, but if you wanted to do something like that, we could talk. You could have this kind of technology with a different style of ROM thing. So just don't say it's not possible, or don't say I'm locking you out of it, because I'm not. It's just a matter of having to redo the design if you don't like the choices that have been made. Okay, variations related to audio. I already mentioned you could change the oscillator, the onboard oscillator frequency. So like I said, I've been recommending 4 megahertz. Apparently, I think the Tandy 1000 used an NTSC oscillator. So that's, 3.579545 megahertz. Anyway, close to that. You could do a different oscillator speed. Some people complain about the not being able to get to the lowest notes. I think it's not as big a problem as some people think, but whatever. You could put in a different oscillator if you wanted to. You just have to source the parts and figure it out. You could change the output filter, the pretty basic output filter on the design right now. So I think it sounds alright. Don't really need anything different, but if you're a real hoity-toity audiophile, you might want to put a more complex output filter on there, or change some of the values for resistors and capacitors and that sort of thing. Especially if you were building a standalone sound card, you may want to change to where there's an output amplifier, so you could go basically make louder noises. Again, you don't really need one feeding into the CoCo itself. It seems to work pretty well, but it's a matter of what you're really trying to do. If you did add an output amplifier in particular, you could add a headphone jack. You could, for example, add multiple chips, sound chips, so you could have multiple sound channels, which might be done in a left and right sort of fashion for stereo output, or you could just add more channels that are all mixed together. So instead of having 3 oscillators, you could have 6 plus a couple of noise channels, that sort of thing. My point being, I've got a card here. It's got a certain design decisions that have been made. I think they're reasonable, and I'd like to see people try to use them as is. But if you've got good reasons to want some of these variations, there are variations that are possible. And, I might be willing to entertain some if you have a good enough reason for why we want to respin the design. So in conclusion, I think the Game Master cartridge, I think it provides a useful technology for, particularly for enabling music in the video games. You get a better sounding audio than many software-only solutions provide, pure tones or whatever. By putting the hardware in charge of the tone generation, you use a lot less CPU time. And I didn't really explain that, but I guess, so for example, typically, if you're doing generation in software, you'd have something that runs pretty fast, several kilohertz kind of cycles that would need to run and actually flip bits, change the DAC values or whatever to go up and down to make the actual wave for the sound itself. And then you'd have something else that'd have to run more on the tenths of a second or whatever kind of period that chooses which note to play next. So more like a sequencer. So you have the note generator and a sequencer. In this case, with the hardware generating the notes, you don't need any software note generator. And so you save all the cycles that you would have done generating the actual notes themselves. Now, these sound generators on the SN76489, like many other chips, you turn them on and they play that note until you tell it to play a different note. But that means you still need some kind of sequencer to run, typically during VSync or similarly timed events. But by only doing the sequencing part, you're doing a few instructions 50 or 60 times a second, rather than a few instructions thousands of times a second. So it should be obvious how that uses less CPU time. Better audio, less CPU time. I think that's pretty much the whole case for the music. And you can do multiple tones together, so you can play chords and that sort of thing, which is a bit harder to do. You're going to have to use even more CPU time to do that if you're having to do it in software. The Game Master cartridge also, of course, allows for bigger games on the cartridge because of the bank switching. So, very cool there. If we have games that need to get bigger, we can do so. Because I've picked the SN76489, it's not the fanciest sound chip. For example, you can't do automated manipulations of the tone, like with an envelope generator, like many of the other not many, but some of the other chips have. Maybe many. Anyway, some of the other chips have that. Now, you can still do some things. It helps to manipulate the volume a bit if you give it slightly different tone sounds or whatever. You can do that in the sequencer. So, yeah, you give back a little bit of the CPU time you're saving by having to do a little more work in the sequencer. But, it works out. And like I said, the hardware is a lot cheaper. And so because the hardware is so much cheaper, you can add the chip to the cartridge and have a relatively small effect on the cost of the cartridge hardware. And like I said, you can add a really big value. So there you go. The CoCo Game Master cartridge, big value for your game, fairly small cost. That probably covers everything I really need to say. I hope you've enjoyed my talking here. Kind of went a little long, but hopefully it's worthwhile. Happy CoCoing. CoCo forever, and of course, go be retro.
This is the CoCo Crew Podcast Network.
This is it, gang. The greatest Radio Shack value ever offered. The new TRS-80 color computer, featuring 4K to 16K of memory, 53-key keyboard, 16 lines of 32 uppercase characters, connectors for two two-dimensional joysticks with push-button switch on each, RS-232 serial I/O port, 1500 baud cassette port. To get yours, buy a box of Gimme Crisp cereal, then, with your name and address, send $400 in coin and a Gimme Crisp box top to Color Computer, Box 812, St. Louis, Missouri. If you don't agree that the TRS-80 color computer is tops, return it. We'll return your money. That's Color Computer, Box 812, St. Louis, Missouri.
Welcome back to the Games Corner on episode 32. But before I get into this month's segment, I have an MC10 public service announcement to make. A few weeks ago, I attended a CoCo Talk After Dark episode, and someone called or texted in asking what the power adapter requirements are for the MC10 computer. I just want to clarify what the real voltage specs are, because a few answers that were kicked around are definitely not correct, and I certainly wouldn't want to see anyone fry their beloved MC10. The real voltage specs are 8 volts AC at 1.5 amps. However, if you are like me and have a bunch of these computers, and all somehow never came with any power supplies, well, you are in luck. You can use a Nintendo NES power adapter with it. The NES adapter outputs 9 volts AC and has the exact same polarity and tip size. The nice thing with this option is aftermarket NES power adapters are readily available due to the resurgence in retro video gaming. I'm on Amazon right now checking, and I can see them listed brand new for under $10, including free shipping right to your door. So there you have it. No excuse now not to get your MC10 out and hooked up. You have a plethora of software to check out from Jim Gary, and I see he's also working on porting Forest of Doom over to it as well. That will definitely be cool to check out. As John would say, all right. Welcome back to the Games Corner. First of all, I'd like to say Happy New Year to everyone listening right now. This month I'm excited to kick off the new year with this certain title. Not sure many of you heard of this rare gem. It's called Super Kid. This game was more known in the Dragon crowd as it was sold across the pond. I stumbled across this game by a fluke when I first got back into my CoCo in 2005. One of the first CoCo nuts I met online was Breeza from Australia. He was kind enough to point me in the right direction for building up a proper CoCo rig back then. One of the things he did was send me a bunch of disk images with mixed software on them, and on one of the disks it had the game Super Kid on it. So this was actually one of the first games I loaded right after getting back into the CoCo. Super Kid was programmed in 1987 by Wayne Smithson and published by QuickBeam Software. It requires a color computer 1 or 2, and of course works on a Dragon. I'm not sure how much memory it requires, but I'll take a guess and say 32K. Super Kid is a 2D side-scrolling platform-style game. It is heavily influenced by the game Super Wonder Boy by Sega on the Sega Master System. It's not a total clone of it, but it definitely is very similar. I was impressed right from the start when the game loaded and it greeted you with amazing digitized speech and fantastic music that sounded like quality chiptunes you would hear on a computer with a dedicated sound chip. When the game first loads and gets to the title screen, it says, Super Kid, and followed by the excellent music. Once the actual game starts, it'll say, Go get 'em, Super Kid. And if you finish a level, it'll say, Well played. Instead of me telling you about it, here, have a listen. Super Kid. Super Kid. Well played. Isn't that awesome? Or maybe I'm just a sucker for low bitrate digitized speech. The music is also very impressive, and although I may not be able to hear it because my microphone doesn't pick up the real low frequencies, the music actually hits some real low notes. The graphics are also just as impressive. Glorious P-Mode 3 screens with side-scrolling action. The object of the game is to guide our hero through each level avoiding snails, dogs, and bees. That's quite a combo if you ask me. You can pick up a weapon to shoot the snails, but you cannot destroy the dogs. You need to jump over them. You also have a life meter and need to keep eating fruit along the way to stay alive. The other trick with this game is you can only move towards the right. You cannot go back, so all your jumps and firing must be properly timed. I find the best strategy is to always look ahead and see what's coming up next to time your next move. If I was to criticize anything about this game, it would be the lack of sound during the actual gameplay. There's absolutely no noise when you're in gameplay mode. But in all fairness, with the quality of the game, I doubt there was any CPU resources left for the programmer to add sounds during the gameplay. I'd imagine that side-scrolling takes a lot of power to pull off, especially on CoCo 1 or 2 platform. Well, there you have it, a fantastic side-scroller game to check out and enjoy on your CoCo or Dragon. As of the time of this recording, I do not see Super Kid on the CoCo Archives website, but I do see it is available on the Dragon Archives website. I'm starting to realize between discovering this game and hearing John win all those cool Dragon cassette games from across the pond that there are some hidden gems we never got for our CoCo. I'm going to take some time and research more of what was available for the Dragon that was never released here. Who knows, there could be more hidden gems like this game. Stay tuned for next month's segment. I just may have found another rarity to mention. Until then, game on.
You're listening to the CoCo Crew Podcast, a delicious adventure into the world of retro computer news and information. Featuring Tandy Color Computer.
Well, we have reached the end of episode 32. I'd like to thank our host John Linville for procuring all the news articles each month and providing us with legendary tech segments. Also like to thank Mike Rowan for creating those amazing commercials and audio clips. I honestly don't know how he does it each month. He must have the infinite imagination machine. Thanks also goes out to Boise Pete for being a part of the show. I'd say you definitely moved up a level from just sitting in the corner and watching. Big thanks goes out to L. Curtis Boyle for lending us your time to record an interview with you. I found this interview very fascinating, especially hearing the story of how you implemented a full powerful CoCo 3 setup and taking place of an aging PDP-11. It also blew my mind how the CoCo setup was still in operation until the early millennium. I really do love hearing stories like this. Last but not least, we'd like to thank all of you for listening and your support each month. Please feel free to send us your feedback as we like to hear from you. Hope you all enjoyed this month's podcast. Until next month, CoCo and Retro Forever.
It's a blast from the past.
Please listen carefully.
CoCo. 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 CoCo.
Dance like there's no tomorrow.
What is this crazy rock and roll music anyway?
It's a blast from the past.